Hey and welcome. I'm here to take you through the complete unabridged history of the Shimada clan from Overwatch. From ancient traditions to modern tragedy, from brotherhood to betrayal, from honor to redemption. The Shimada family story is one of the most compelling and tragic tales in all of Overwatch lore, spanning generations and touching on themes of duty, family, identity, and what it truly means to find your path in life. Over the years since Overwatch launched, we've received fragments of this story through cinematics, comics, short stories, in-game voice lines, and environmental storytelling scattered across multiple maps. The Dragons animated short gave us our first real look at the conflict between Hanzo and Genji. The Duality comic expanded on their childhood. The Reflections comic showed us glimpses of their separate journeys. And with the introduction of Kiriko, we've learned even more about the Shimada clan's place in Kanezaka and Hanamura, their traditions, and the people who served them. Whether you're new to Overwatch lore or a veteran player looking to refresh your memory, this video will take you through everything we know about the Shimada clan, their rise, their fall, and what the future might hold. So settle in, get comfortable, because this is going to be a deep dive. Now before we start, a note on the timeline. As with all Overwatch lore, specific dates are rarely given. Most information is provided in relative terms, decades ago, years before the present, and so on. The Shimada clan's story stretches back potentially centuries, but our focus will be on the modern era, particularly the last 50 to 60 years of Overwatch's timeline. We'll be pulling from every available source, including the animated shorts, comics, short stories, developer interviews, and in-game details. The ancient roots. To understand the Shimada clan, we need to start at the beginning, or at least as far back as we can trace. The Shimada family is not simply a criminal organization that appeared in recent decades. This is a clan with deep historical roots in Japan, specifically in the region around Hanamura and Kanezaka. The word clan itself is important here. This isn't just a family or a gang. A clan implies tradition, legacy, structure, and most importantly, a code. The Shimadas have operated for generations with a very specific set of values and traditions that have been passed down through family lines. They are a family bound not just by blood, but by honor, duty, and ancient practices that connect them to something far older than the modern world of Overwatch. One of the most significant aspects of Shimada tradition is their connection to the dragon spirit. This is not merely symbolic. As we've seen with both Hanzo and Genji, the ability to summon and control dragon spirits is a real, tangible power that runs in the Shimada bloodline. In the Dragons animated short, we learn about the legend of the two dragon brothers, one who embodied the power of the North Wind and one who embodied the power of the South Wind. The legend tells of two dragon spirits, brothers who ruled over their lands with great power. The elder brother was strong and fierce, commanding the North Wind. The younger brother was swift and clever, commanding the South Wind. Together, they brought balance and prosperity to their realm. But as with many tales of siblings, conflict eventually arose. The younger dragon brother grew restless and ambitious. He challenged the elder for control of their lands. The elder dragon was forced to strike down his own brother, a decision that brought him great sorrow. In his grief, the elder dragon realized that he had lost not just his brother, but a part of himself. The legend says that the elder dragon's sorrow was so great that he would wander alone, his spirit incomplete, forever mourning the brother he was forced to destroy. This legend is foundational to understanding the Shimada clan. It's not just a story they tell, it's a prophecy, a warning, and ultimately, a reflection of their own family's fate. The story of Hanzo and Genji is in many ways a modern retelling of this ancient legend. The Shimada clan has always understood that their greatest strength, the bond between family members, can also become their greatest tragedy. Beyond the dragon spirits, the Shimada clan has maintained other traditions as well. They've preserved ancient martial arts techniques, ninja skills that go back centuries, The use of the sword, the bow, stealth, assassination, these are not skills learned in a single generation. They represent accumulated knowledge passed down from master to student, parent to child, across countless years. The clan also maintained connections to spiritual practices. We know from Kiriko's story that her grandmother attended the local fox shrine, the Kanezaka shrine, dedicated to the fox spirit that watches over the area. The Shimadas, while perhaps not as directly spiritual as some, understood the importance of these traditions and the spirits that inhabited their lands. They were part of the cultural and spiritual fabric of their region. In earlier times, before the modern era we're familiar with, the Shimada clan likely operated very differently than they do now. They may have been samurai, warriors serving a lord, or perhaps they were always a bit more independent, ronin who carved out their own territory. Some historical ninja clans in Japan did exactly this, establishing themselves as powers in their regions, offering services to those who needed them, and building networks of influence and control. What we know for certain is that by the time we reach the 20th century and the era of Overwatch's main story, the Shimada clan has transformed into something quite different. They are no longer simply warriors or even a noble house. They have become the Shimada crime family, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Asia. The criminal empire, the Shimada. Clan's transition from traditional clan to criminal empire likely happened gradually, perhaps over the course of the 20th century as Japan modernized and changed. Traditional power structures shifted, and families that once held legitimate power had to adapt or disappear. The Shimadas chose to adapt. They built an empire not through legitimate business, but through the underworld. The Shimada criminal organization became involved in activities that we can piece together from various sources: smuggling, assassination, extortion, weapons trafficking, and various other illegal enterprises. They weren't small-time criminals. This was organized crime on a massive scale, with operations extending beyond Japan into other parts of Asia and potentially globally. What made the Shimada clan particularly formidable was that they combined modern criminal enterprise with traditional skills and discipline. Their enforcers weren't just thugs, they were trained in the family's martial arts. Their leaders weren't just crime bosses, they were heirs to centuries of tradition who understood strategy, loyalty, and the long game. The physical seat of Shimada power is Shimada Castle in Hanamura. This isn't just a base of operations, it's a statement. The castle itself is a blend of traditional Japanese architecture and modern fortification. It sits overlooking the town, a constant reminder of who holds power in this region. Inside the castle, we can see evidence of the family's dual nature. Traditional elements like the training rooms, the shrines, the gardens, these sit alongside modern technology and security systems. The castle grounds are extensive. There are training areas where young Shimadas and their followers would learn combat skills. There are meeting rooms where business, both legal and illegal, would be conducted. There are private family quarters where the Shimada children would grow up surrounded by both luxury and expectation. And there are armories, proving that the Shimadas were always prepared for conflict. The town of Hanamura itself exists in the shadow of the castle. The citizens know who runs things. Some benefit from Shimada protection and patronage. Others suffer under their control. It's a complicated relationship. The Shimadas aren't simply tyrants. They maintain certain traditions of responsibility to the community, but they're also criminals who won't hesitate to eliminate threats or opposition. Beyond Hanamura, the Shimadas had influence over the larger region, including Kanezaka. This neighbouring area has its own distinct character, but has long fallen within the Shimada sphere of influence. It's in Kanezaka, where we'll later learn about Kiriko and her family, the Yamagamis, who served the Shimadas for generations. The reach of the Shimada criminal empire extended far beyond just these two towns. They had connections throughout Japan and across Asia. They conducted business with other criminal organizations, with corrupt officials, with anyone who had something they needed or who needed something they could provide. The shimada name carried weight in the underworld. Cross them and face serious consequences. Work with them and profit could be substantial. This criminal empire needed structure to function. The shimadas weren't just a family. They were an organization with ranks, with loyal followers, with people bound to them by oaths, by fear, by tradition, or by profit. Some of these followers came from families that had served the shimadas for generations. Others were recruited for their skills or their connections. One such family that served the shimadas were the Yamagamis. Asa Yamagami, a master swordsman and ninja, served as the Shimada clan's swordmaster. Her husband Toshiro was the swordsmith, creating weapons for the family. This wasn't just employment. This was a bond of service that went back generations, a relationship based on mutual respect and honor, even within the context of a criminal organization. The shimadas understood loyalty, and they cultivated it carefully. They took care of those who served them well. They were generous to those who proved their worth, but betrayal was met with swift and brutal punishment. This combination of reward and fear kept the organization functioning smoothly for decades. At the head of this empire, as we reach the mid-21st century, in the Overwatch timeline, sat Sojiro Shimada. Sojiro Shimada, the patriarch Sojiro Shimada, was the head of the Shimada clan during the peak of their power. We don't know a great deal about Sojiro's early life, or how he came to lead the clan, but we can infer some things from what we know of the family structure and traditions. As head of the clan, Sojiro would have been responsible for all major decisions. He directed the criminal operations, maintained relationships with allies and rivals, ensured the family's traditions were upheld, and most importantly, prepared the next generation to eventually take his place. In traditional Japanese family structures, particularly in clans like the Shimadas, the eldest son typically inherits leadership. This creates clear lines of succession and helps prevent internal power struggles. Sojiro had two sons, Hanzo and Genji. From the moment they were born, their fates were largely determined by their birth order. Hanzo, the eldest, was destined to inherit everything. Genji, the younger, would have to find his place within the family structure, supporting his brother and the clan. We can imagine that Sojiro was a complicated man. He was a criminal, certainly, responsible for untold suffering through his organization's activities. But he was also a father, a keeper of traditions, someone who bore the weight of centuries of family legacy on his shoulders. Every decision he made affected not just his family's criminal enterprise, but the continuation of Shimada traditions that stretched back potentially hundreds of years. Sojiro's relationship with his sons would have been formal, perhaps distant in some ways, as was traditional. He wasn't just their father, he was their master, their teacher, their ultimate authority. Every interaction would have carried the weight of tradition and expectation. From a young age, both boys would have understood that they were not simply children. They were Shimadas, and that meant something profound. We know from various sources that Sojiro ensured his sons received the best training possible. They didn't just learn criminal enterprise, they learned the traditional skills of the Shimada clan. They trained under Asa Yamagami, learning swordsmanship and ninja techniques. They studied the history of their family. They learned about the dragon spirits and the legend of the two brothers. Everything in their education was designed to prepare them to uphold and continue the Shimada legacy. For Hanzo, this education must have felt like a tremendous pressure. He was the heir, the one who would eventually lead. Every lesson, every training session, every interaction with his father was coloured by this expectation. He couldn't simply be good. He had to be exceptional. He couldn't just learn the traditions. He had to embody them. The weight of centuries of Shimada history would one day rest on his shoulders, alone. For Genji, the experience might have been somewhat different. As the younger son, there was perhaps less pressure in some ways. He would never be the leader, so his performance might not have been scrutinized quite as harshly. But this also meant he might have struggled more with questions of purpose. If he wasn't going to lead, what exactly was his role? What did it mean to be the second son of the Shimada clan? Sojiro's leadership of the clan seems to have been effective. The organisation was strong, profitable, and well-positioned. They had weathered the changes brought by the Omnic crisis. In fact, they may have even profited from it, as chaos and disruption often create opportunities for those willing to operate outside the law. By all accounts, under Sojiro's leadership, the Shimada clan was at the height of its power. But then something happened that would change everything. Sojiro Shimada was assassinated. The circumstances of his death are told to us primarily through in-game details and the animated short dragons. Sojiro was killed by the Hashimoto clan, long-term rivals of the Shimadas. This wasn't just murder. This was a direct challenge to Shimada power, an attempt to destabilize or perhaps even destroy them entirely. The Hashimoto clan had always been rivals, but the assassination of the clan head was an escalation beyond anything that had come before. It was a declaration of war. It was also an opportunity. With Sojiro dead, the Shimada clan was vulnerable. If the succession didn't go smoothly, if the new leader wasn't strong enough, the entire organization could crumble. Sojiro's death thrust his sons into a situation they weren't fully prepared for, despite all their training. Hanzo was indeed ready to lead in many ways. He was skilled, disciplined, and understood the weight of his responsibilities. But he was also young, suddenly bearing the burden of leadership during a time of crisis and threat. And he had to deal not just with external enemies, but with the far more complicated challenge of his relationship with his younger brother. Genji, for his part, found himself at a crossroads. With his father dead and his brother now in charge, where did he fit? What was his purpose? These questions, which had perhaps always been present, now became far more urgent. The death of Sojiro Shimada marked the end of an era and the beginning of a tragic chain of events that would ultimately destroy the Shimada clan as it had existed for generations. To understand how it all fell apart, we need to look closely at the two brothers and the very different paths they were walking. Hanzo and Genji, childhood and brotherhood. Hanzo and Genji Shimada grew up in a world of privilege and expectation. They had the finest training, access to resources most people could only dream of, and were heirs to a powerful legacy. But they were also trapped in many ways by that same legacy. From the Duality comic and various other sources, we get glimpses into their childhood. The two brothers were close once. They trained together under Asa Yamagami, learning the arts of sword, bow and stealth. They learned about their family's history and traditions. They heard the legend of the two dragon brothers countless times. In the Duality comic, we see them as children, training and playing together. There's genuine affection between them. Hanzo, as the older brother, seems protective of Genji. Genji looks up to Hanzo. They have the kind of bond that brothers often share. Complicated by rivalry perhaps, but fundamentally built on shared experience and blood. Asa Yamagami served as their primary teacher for combat skills. She was a demanding instructor, as befitting someone training the heirs of the Shimada clan. She wouldn't accept anything less than excellence. She taught them that every movement had purpose, that discipline was essential, that the path of the warrior required constant dedication. We know from Kiriko's stories that Asa was also a mother figure to her daughter Kiriko, and that Kiriko grew up alongside Hanzo and Genji. The three of them trained together, played together, and formed a bond. Kiriko considered both Hanzo and Genji as older brothers of sorts, though the Shimada boys would have always been above her in the social hierarchy. Kiriko's presence in their childhood is significant. She represents a connection to the community, to normal life outside the weight of Shimada expectations. When the three of them were together, perhaps there were moments when Hanzo and Genji could just be children, not heirs to a criminal empire. But as they grew older, the the differences between the brothers became more pronounced. This wasn't simply a matter of personality, though their personalities did differ significantly. It was about their roles, their places in the family structure, and what was expected of them. Hanzo took his responsibilities seriously. He understood from a young age that he would one day lead. He internalized the lessons about duty, honor, and the weight of tradition. He excelled in his training not just because he was naturally talented, but because he worked relentlessly. He couldn't allow himself to fail. The future of the entire clan would depend on him. We can see this in how Hanzo presents himself even as a young man. He's formal, controlled, serious. He doesn't allow himself much frivolity. Every action is measured, every word chosen carefully. This isn't arrogance exactly, though it might sometimes appear that way. It's the behavior of someone who has internalized enormous pressure and expects nothing less than perfection from himself. Genji was different. As the younger son, he had more freedom in some ways, but this freedom came with its own burdens. If he wasn't going to lead, what was he supposed to do? Support Hanzo certainly, but that seemed like an inadequate purpose. Genji was naturally talented, perhaps even more naturally gifted than Hanzo in some ways, but he lacked the same sense of driving purpose. As they moved into young adulthood, these differences became more problematic. Hanzo continued on his path of discipline and duty. Genji began to rebel in his own way. He spent less time on clan business. He enjoyed the pleasures that wealth and privilege afforded him. He developed a reputation as something of a playboy, someone more interested in enjoying life than shouldering responsibility. The Duality comic and various other sources paint a picture of the young adult Genji as charming, charismatic, and often absent from where he was supposed to be. He'd skip clan meetings, he'd be out at clubs or with friends when he should have been training. He excelled when he did apply himself, but seemed unwilling to commit fully to the path that had been laid out for him. This wasn't simply selfishness on Genji's part, though it might have appeared that way to others. Genji was struggling with fundamental questions of identity and purpose. He was a shimada, yes, but what did that mean for him specifically? He had skills and abilities, but in service of what? A criminal empire he hadn't chosen to be born into? Traditions that sometimes felt suffocating? The Shimada clan's traditions demanded absolute loyalty and dedication. Genji's behavior was seen as a rejection of those values. The clan elders, those senior members who helped advise and guide the family, grew increasingly concerned. They saw Genji as a liability, someone whose behavior dishonored the family and potentially weakened the clan at a time when strength was essential. Hanzo watched his brother with a mixture of frustration and concern. He loved Genji certainly, but he also couldn't understand how Genji could be so cavalier about responsibilities that Hanzo took so seriously. From Hanzo's perspective, they had been given everything. They had been born into a position of power and privilege. The least they could do was honor the sacrifices of their ancestors and work to preserve what had been built. The relationship between the brothers was fracturing. They still cared for each other, but a gap was opening between them. They spoke less honestly. They understood each other less. The weight of expectations and the different paths they were walking were pulling them apart. And then their father was assassinated. Suddenly, Hanzo was thrust into leadership. At an age when he was still learning, still preparing, he became the head of the Shimada clan. The organization looked to him for direction. The elders expected him to prove himself worthy. External enemies, particularly the Hashimoto clan, were watching for any sign of weakness. As tradition dictated, Hanzo took on the role. He became the head of the Shimada criminal empire. And immediately, he faced a crisis not from outside enemies, but from within his own family. What was he going to do about Genji? The confrontation, a brother's task. The period immediately following Sujiro's death must have been chaotic. The Shimada clan was in mourning, but they couldn't afford to show weakness. Hanzo had to consolidate his power quickly, make decisions, and proved that leadership was in capable hands. The clan elders came to Hanzo with their concerns about Genji. The younger Shimada was showing no signs of becoming more involved in clan affairs. If anything, with their father's death, Genji seemed to retreat even further into his lifestyle of pleasure-seeking. He wasn't attending important meetings. He wasn't taking on responsibilities. He was, from the perspective of the elders, shirking his duty at the clan's most vulnerable moment. The elders told Hanzo that something had to be done. Genji's behaviour was unacceptable. It dishonoured their father's memory. It weakened the clan, and it sent a message to others that the Shimadas were in disarray. They demanded that Hanzo, as the new head, take action to bring Genji in line. We know from the Dragon's animated short and other sources what happened next. Hanzo confronted Genji. The exact details of their conversation have never been fully revealed, but we can imagine the scene. Hanzo would have approached his brother with a mixture of duty and desperation. He needed Genji to understand how serious this was. The clan's future, everything their family had built, was at stake. Genji had to step up, had to take his place within the family structure, had to show the world that the Shimadas were united and strong. Genji, for his part, likely saw this as another attempt to control him, to force him into a role he didn't want. He had just lost his father. He was grieving in his own way, and now his brother, backed by the clan elders, was demanding that he give up his autonomy and submit to the family's expectations. The conversation must have been heated. Years of frustration and misunderstanding would have boiled over. Hanzo would have felt the weight of his new responsibilities crushing down on him. Genji would have felt trapped, pushed to a breaking point. Both of them were under enormous stress, both processing their father's death, both dealing with their own fears and uncertainties. Hanzo made his demand clear. Genji had to change. He had to take his role seriously. He had to become a true member of the Shimada clan in more than just name. And Genji refused. We don't know exactly what words were said, what specific line was crossed, but we know the result. The confrontation escalated beyond words. In the Dragon's short, we hear Hanzo's haunted words about what happened. I was forced to kill him. What happened in Shimada Castle that night became a defining moment in Overwatch lore. The two brothers, once close, faced each other not as family but as opponents. The years of training under Asa Yamagami, all those skills they had learned side by side, were now turned against each other. It's likely that Genji drew his sword first, seeing no other way out of the situation. Or perhaps Hanzo, feeling backed into a corner by duty and the demands of the elders, made the first move. Either way, the fight was on. The two brothers battled through the castle. These weren't just skilled fighters. These were masters trained from childhood, heirs to centuries of martial tradition, and bearers of supernatural abilities. The clash must have been devastating, destructive, almost beautiful in its deadly precision. Genji was incredibly skilled, perhaps more naturally talented than Hanzo. He was swift, agile, creative in his approach. His style was fluid, adaptive, unpredictable. He darted and weaved, struck from unexpected angles, using the environment to his advantage. Hanzo fought with controlled precision. Every arrow he loosed was perfectly aimed. Every movement was calculated. He combined his archery with close combat, never giving Genji a moment's rest. His style was about absolute accuracy, about eliminating threats with maximum efficiency. The battle raged through the halls and gardens of the castle. We can imagine the destruction. Priceless family heirlooms destroyed, walls scorched and slashed, the ancient building bearing the scars of the brothers' conflict. Despite Genji's skills, Hanzo had advantages. He was the one who had fully committed to the Shimada path. He had trained relentlessly, without distraction. And perhaps most importantly, he believed absolutely that what he was doing was necessary. That conviction gave him a terrible strength. The fight reached its climax in one of the castle gardens. Genji, perhaps exhausted, or simply outmaneuvered, found himself at a disadvantage. Hanzo struck with his sword in a series of devastating blows. Genji fell. When Hanzo looked down at his brother's body, broken and bleeding, the full horror of what had happened crashed over him. The clan elders had demanded he deal with Genji. He had confronted his brother. They had fought, and now Genji lay dying at his feet. In that moment, Hanzo's world shattered. He had just killed his own brother. The weight of that action was incomprehensible. This wasn't an enemy. This wasn't a rival from another clan. This was Genji, his younger brother, the person he had grown up with, trained with, shared his entire life with. The legend of the two dragon brothers had become reality. The elder brother had struck down the younger, and just like in the ancient story, there could be no victory in such an act, only devastating loss and sorrow. Hanzo believed Genji was dead. As far as he knew, he had murdered his own brother in the gardens of Shimada Castle. And the worst part was that he had done it because he thought it was his duty. The clan had demanded it. He had convinced himself it was necessary. But necessity didn't erase the horror of fratricide. What Hanzo didn't know, what no one could have known at that moment, was that someone had been watching, and that someone was about to give Genji a second chance at life, though it would come at a terrible price. Overwatch's intervention. The cyborg awakening. Overwatch had been monitoring the Shimada clan for some time. The organisation wasn't just focused on omnic threats or terrorist organisations like Talon. They also kept watch on major criminal enterprises around the world, and the Shimada clan certainly qualified. The assassination of Sojiro Shimada had put the clan on Overwatch's radar even more intensively. This was a moment of vulnerability for one of Asia's most powerful criminal organisations. If Overwatch wanted to make a move against them, now was the time. But Overwatch needed intelligence first. They needed to understand the clan's structure, their operations, their vulnerabilities. So they watched and waited for the right opportunity. When the confrontation between Hanzo and Genji occurred, Overwatch agents were nearby. They witnessed the aftermath of the fight. They saw Genji's broken body lying in the garden. They saw Hanzo walking away, destroyed by what he had done. And they saw an opportunity. Genji Shimada was dying, but he wasn't dead yet. With immediate medical intervention, with access to the most advanced cybernetic technology available, he could potentially be saved. More importantly, from Overwatch's perspective, a grateful Genji Shimada would be an incredible asset in their campaign against the clan. The decision was made quickly. An Overwatch team extracted Genji from the castle grounds. They brought him to their medical facilities, and there, doctors and engineers began the process of rebuilding him. The extent of Genji's injuries was catastrophic. Large portions of his body had been destroyed in the fight with Hanzo. To save him required radical intervention. Piece by piece, damaged flesh was replaced with cybernetic components. Advanced prosthetics replaced lost limbs. Synthetic systems took over functions that his biological body could no longer perform. The process was agonizing, not just physically, but psychologically. Genji drifted in and out of consciousness during the surgeries and procedures. When he was aware, he was in constant pain. But worse than the physical pain was the existential horror of what was being done to him. His body, his physical form, was being replaced with machines. Dr. Angela Ziegler, Mercy, was involved in Genji's care during this time. She provided what medical support she could, but even her advanced healing technology had limits when dealing with injuries this severe and modifications this extensive. She watched as Genji struggled with what was happening to him, and felt deep sympathy for the young man. The lead on Genji's cybernetic enhancements was likely Overwatch's engineering and technology divisions, with possible input from various experts. They weren't just patching him up, they were enhancing him, giving him capabilities that went beyond what his original body could do. The cybernetic systems increased his speed and agility. They allowed for enhanced strength, They integrated perfectly with his ninja training, making him potentially even more formidable than before. But Genji didn't see it that way. When he finally woke up fully and looked at himself, he was horrified. He wasn't human anymore. He was part machine, a cyborg, something that wasn't quite either flesh or metal, but an uncomfortable fusion of both. His face was largely preserved, though even that had some modifications, but his body was unrecognizable. Chrome and synthetic materials replaced skin and muscle. Mechanical joints replaced biological ones. He could feel the power in his new form, but he felt disconnected from it, like he was operating a machine rather than inhabiting his own body. Genji's psychological state during this period was dark. He had nearly been killed by his own brother. He had been turned into something he didn't recognize, and now Overwatch was presenting him with a choice. Gabriel Reyes, the commander of Blackwatch, Overwatch's covert ops division, approached Genji with an offer. Overwatch had saved his life. They had given him a new body, new capabilities, a second chance. In exchange, they wanted him to work with them to dismantle the Shimada criminal empire. From Overwatch's perspective, this was a perfect arrangement. Genji knew the clan's operations, their secrets, their vulnerabilities. He had access and knowledge that would take years for Overwatch to acquire through normal intelligence gathering. And he had every reason to want revenge against the organization that had essentially ordered his death. For Genji, the decision was complicated. Part of him wanted nothing more to do with the Shimada clan. They had rejected him, tried to force him into a role he didn't want, and ultimately tried to kill him for refusing. But another part of him understood that taking up Overwatch's offer meant truly severing ties with his past, with his family, with everything he had been. There was also the question of Hanzo. His brother had struck him down, had left him for dead. Did Genji want revenge? Did he hate Hanzo for what had happened? Or did he understand that Hanzo had been trapped by circumstance and duty, just as Genji had been? In the end, Genji accepted Overwatch's offer. But it wasn't out of clear-headed conviction. It was because he didn't know what else to do. His old life was gone. His body was gone. His identity felt shattered. At least with Overwatch, he had a purpose, even if that purpose was destructive. And so Genji Shimada became a Blackwatch operative. His mission was to help dismantle his family's criminal empire. And the fuel that drove him through those early missions wasn't justice or heroism, it was rage. The path of vengeance. Genji in Blackwatch. Genji's time in Blackwatch was dark and violent. He was a weapon pointed at his former clan, and he cut through their operations with brutal efficiency. Everything he had learned growing up, all his training, all his knowledge of the clan's inner workings, he now used against them. Blackwatch specialised in the kind of operations that Overwatch proper couldn't officially sanction. They operated in the shadows, doing the dirty work that was necessary but couldn't be publicly acknowledged. It was the perfect environment for someone like Genji, who at this point didn't care much about moral niceties. He just wanted to destroy the thing that had destroyed him. Genji's approach to missions during this period was ruthless. He moved like a shadow, striking fast and disappearing before anyone could respond. His cybernetic enhancements made him faster and more deadly than any normal human could be. Combined with his Shimada training, he was essentially unstoppable. We know from various comics and stories that Genji worked alongside other Blackwatch operatives, including Gabriel Reyes himself, Cole, Cassidy, and Moira O'Diorane. These were dark characters, people operating in moral grey areas, doing things that couldn't stand up to scrutiny in the light of day. Cassidy, being a former outlaw himself, probably understood Genji's situation better than most. He'd been given a second chance by Reyes, just as Genji had been given one by Overwatch. He might have tried to reach out, to connect with Genji, but the young cyborg was closed off, locked in his own anger and pain. Moira was interested in Genji from a scientific perspective. His cybernetic modifications were extensive and fascinating. she probably wanted to study him, to understand how the integration of technology and biology worked in his case. Genji would have found this attention clinical and dehumanizing, reinforcing his feeling that he was now more machine than man. Reyes treated Genji as an operative, a tool to be deployed. He wasn't cruel exactly, but he wasn't particularly warm either. Reyes had his own problems and his own dark path he was walking. He gave Genji missions, expected results, and didn't pry too much into the cyborg's state of mind. The missions against the Shimada clan were successful. Genji helped Overwatch identify key members of the organization, locate their operations, disrupt their activities. One by one, pieces of the Shimada criminal empire were dismantled. For Genji, each mission was bittersweet. He was striking back at the organization that had tried to kill him, but he was also destroying his family's legacy. These were people he had grown up with, places that held memories, traditions that went back centuries. He was betraying everything the Shimada stood for, and while part of him felt that was justified, another part felt hollow about it. The psychological toll on Genji during this period was immense. He was disconnected from his body, feeling like he was piloting a machine rather than inhabiting himself. He was alienated from his past, having turned against his clan. He had no clear sense of his future or who he was supposed to be. He was just existing, moving from mission to mission, using violence as a way to avoid confronting the deeper pain. His relationship with his cybernetic form was particularly troubled. He hated looking at himself. The reflections in mirrors or windows showed him something that wasn't quite human. He could feel the mechanical parts working inside him, could hear the subtle sounds they made. It was a constant reminder that the Genji he had been was gone. Some interactions with other Overwatch members hint at this struggle. Mercy tried to help him, both medically and emotionally. She could see that he was suffering, that the modifications had given him a physical body, but had damaged his sense of self. She probably encouraged him to talk about it, to process what had happened, but Genji wasn't ready. There are suggestions in the lore that Sojourn, another Overwatch operative who had also undergone cybernetic enhancement, tried to mentor Genji in some way. Sojourn had chosen her modifications, had integrated them into her sense of self successfully. She might have tried to help Genji see that being part machine didn't make him less human. But again, Genji wasn't ready to hear this message. The campaign against the Shimada clan continued for some time, perhaps months or even years. We don't know the exact timeline, but we know it was thorough. By the time Overwatch was done, the Shimada criminal empire was severely damaged, if not completely broken. And then came the questions that Genji had been avoiding. With his mission essentially complete, what was he supposed to do now? Who was he supposed to be? He couldn't go back to being the person he was before. That person had died in the gardens of Shimada Castle, but he also couldn't keep being a weapon in the shadows forever. Genji left Blackwatch, left Overwatch entirely. He wandered, searching for answers he couldn't articulate questions for. He travelled the world, alone with his thoughts and his pain. He was looking for meaning, for purpose, for some understanding of what it meant to be Genji Shimada in this new form. And eventually, his wandering brought him to the Shambhali monastery in Nepal. The path of redemption, Zenyatta, and transformation. The Shambhali were Omnic monks, led by the enigmatic Mondatta, who preached harmony between humans and Omnics. They meditated on the nature of existence, on the soul, on what it meant to be truly alive. Their monastery in the Himalayas was a place of peace and contemplation, far removed from the violence and chaos of the world below. One monk in particular, Zenyatta, had different ideas about how to help the world. While Mondatta believed in teaching through words and public presence, Zenyatta thought that real change came through personal connection, through one-on-one mentorship, through helping individuals find their own paths. When Genji arrived at the monastery, He was broken in ways that went far beyond physical. He was disconnected from his body, from his past, from any sense of who he was or who he could be. He was a cyborg ninja who had betrayed his family and served as an assassin, and he had no idea what any of that meant or where to go from there. Zenyatta saw Genji's pain immediately. The Omnic monk recognized someone who was struggling with fundamental questions of identity and existence. In many ways, Genji's crisis mirrored struggles that Omnics faced. What did it mean to be alive when you were made of metal and circuits rather than flesh and blood? Where did consciousness come from? What was the soul? Zenyatta took Genji on as his student. This wasn't formal training like Genji had received growing up. There were no rigid exercises, no drilling of techniques. Instead, Zenyatta taught through conversation, through meditation, through helping Genji ask himself the right questions. The first and most important question was about integration. Genji hated his cybernetic body. He saw it as a prison, as something alien that had been imposed on him. Zenyatta helped him see that the distinction between flesh and machine was less important than Genji thought. A human body is also a kind of machine, Zenyatta might have explained. It's biological rather than mechanical, but it's still a physical form that houses consciousness. What makes someone human isn't the material they're made from. It's their mind, their choices, their capacity for growth and change. Genji's consciousness, his ability to think and feel and choose, that was still entirely his own. This was a revelatory concept for Genji. His entire sense of loss had been based on the idea that his humanity had been taken from him when his body was replaced. But if humanity wasn't about the body, if it was about something deeper, then maybe he wasn't as lost as he thought. Zenyatta also taught Genji about acceptance. There were things about Genji's past that couldn't be changed. He had been born into the Shimada clan. He had been forced into a violent confrontation with his brother. He had nearly died. He had been rebuilt as a cyborg. These were facts, parts of his history that he would carry forever. But acceptance didn't mean approval. Genji didn't have to think these things were good or right. He just had to accept that they were real, that they had happened, and that continuing to rage against them only prolonged his suffering. Meditation became a tool for this acceptance. Sitting in silence, observing his own thoughts and feelings without judgment, Genji learned to be present with his pain rather than constantly trying to escape it. It was hard, maybe the hardest thing he'd ever done, but gradually something shifted. Zenyatta taught him about the harmony between seeming opposites, light and dark, human and machine, past and future. These things weren't in opposition. They were part of larger wholes. Genji didn't have to choose between his human side and his machine side. He could integrate them, could find a way to be whole that incorporated both. We see the visual representation of this journey in Genji's appearance. Early in his time as a Blackwatch operative, his cybernetic body was dark, heavily armoured, almost aggressive in its design. As he found peace with Zenyatta, his appearance changed. The armour became lighter, more streamlined. He incorporated traditional elements of his Shimada heritage into his design. The transformation was external but reflected internal changes. Genji also began to reclaim parts of his past that he had rejected. He started practicing meditation techniques that had Shimada origins. He thought about the legends he'd heard as a child, particularly the story of the two dragon brothers, but with new understanding. He began to see that story not as a curse, but as a teaching about the dangers of conflict and the importance of harmony. One of the most important aspects of Genji's time with Zenyatta was learning about forgiveness. This was perhaps the hardest lesson. Genji had to forgive the Shimada clan for trying to force him into a role he didn't want. He had to forgive Overwatch for the way they had used him. Most difficult of all, he had to forgive Hanzo. Understanding what drove Hanzo to do what he did required Genji to step outside his own pain and see things from his brother's perspective. Hanzo had been trapped by duty, by the expectations of the clan, by his own sense of responsibility. He hadn't wanted to hurt Genji. He had thought he was doing what was necessary to protect the clan. This didn't make what Hanzo did right, but it made it comprehensible. Hanzo was also a victim of the Shimada clan's toxic expectations and rigid traditions. Both brothers had suffered under that weight, just in different ways. But forgiving Hanzo led to an even harder question. Could Hanzo forgive himself? And did Genji have any obligation to help his brother find peace? Zenyatta believed that healing broken connections was important work. The conflict between the two brothers mirrored larger conflicts in the world. If they could find a way to reconcile, to understand each other and move forward, it would be meaningful not just for them personally, but as an example of what was possible. Genji wasn't sure about this. He had found his own path to peace. Did he really need to involve himself in Hanzo's journey? But as he meditated on it, he realized that he couldn't be fully at peace while his brother suffered under the weight of guilt and loss. The two of them were connected, always would be connected, by blood and history, and the legend that seemed to define their family. Eventually, Genji made a decision. He would reach out to Hanzo. He would let his brother know that he had survived. And he would offer Hanzo the opportunity for understanding and perhaps reconciliation. But before he could do that, the world had other plans. Winston activated the recall, calling all former Overwatch agents back into service. And Genji, having found his center and his purpose, decided to answer that call. His time with Zenyatta had given him clarity. He understood who he was now. He was Genji Shimada, a man who bridged flesh and steel, tradition and innovation, past and future. He had skills that could help people. He had overcome his own darkness and could perhaps help others do the same. And yes, he still had unfinished business with his brother. But first, the world needed Overwatch again, and Genji was ready to help. Hanzo's burden, a life in the shadows. While Genji was finding peace and purpose with Zenyatta, Hanzo was living in a completely different reality. From the moment he struck down his brother in the gardens of Shimada Castle, Hanzo's life became a walking nightmare from which there was no awakening. He believed he had killed Genji. He believed he had murdered his own brother, his younger sibling, someone he was supposed to protect. The fact that the clan elders had demanded it, that he had thought it was his duty, none of that made it easier to bear. If anything, it made it worse. He had sacrificed his brother for the clan, and for what? In the immediate aftermath, Hanzo might have tried to continue as head of the Shimada clan. This was what he had been trained for. This was his duty. But how could he continue to lead, knowing what he had done? Every decision would be coloured by guilt. Every interaction would be shadowed by Genji's absence. The castle itself would be haunted by the memory of that terrible night. We know from various sources that Hanzo didn't stay with the clan for long after Genji's apparent death. He walked away. He abandoned his position as head of the Shimada clan, abandoned the criminal empire, abandoned the traditions and expectations that had defined his entire life up to that point. This wasn't an easy decision. Everything Hanzo had been trained for, everything he had built his identity around, was tied to being the Shimada heir. Walking away meant rejecting not just his current position, but his entire sense of self. Who was Hanzo Shimada, if not the head of the Shimada clan? But he couldn't stay. The weight of guilt was too great. He had killed Genji because the clan demanded it. The clan and its expectations had forced him into a position where fratricide seemed like the only option. He couldn't serve an organisation that had made him do that. So Hanzo became a wanderer, a ronin in the truest sense. A ronin is a samurai without a master, someone who has lost their place in the social order and must forge their own path. Hanzo walked away from the Shimada clan and everything it represented, but he brought his guilt and his skills with him. Over the years that followed, Hanzo travelled the world. He lived a solitary existence, never staying in one place for long, avoiding connections with others. He supported himself as an assassin, using his skills for hire. It was dark work, often for dark people, but it was all he knew how to do. There's a profound loneliness in Hanzo's existence during this period. He's isolated not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. He can't forgive himself for what happened with Genji, but he also can't escape it. It's always there, a weight he carries every moment of every day. Hanzo's guilt manifests in interesting ways. He maintains rigorous discipline, perhaps even more strictly than he did when he was training to lead the clan. He practices constantly, pushing himself to perfection in his archery and combat skills. It's as if he's punishing himself, refusing to allow himself any comfort or ease. He also continues to observe certain Shimada traditions, even though he's abandoned the clan. He still feels connected to his family's history and the legends that shaped him. In particular, the story of the two dragon brothers continues to resonate, though now it carries a much more painful significance. Hanzo is living that legend, is the elder brother who struck down the younger, and the sorrow that the legend speaks of has become his constant companion. One tradition that Hanzo maintains is an annual pilgrimage to Shimada Castle. Once a year, on the anniversary of Genji's death, Hanzo returns to Hanamura. He comes to the castle, to the place where everything fell apart, to pay his respects and confront his guilt. These visits are painful. The castle stands as a monument to everything Hanzo lost. It represents his family, his brother, his entire past life, walking through those halls and gardens where he and Genji grew up, where they trained together, where they ultimately fought their final battle. It all comes back with terrible clarity. Hanzo performs a ritual during these visits. He lights incense, says prayers, tries in his own way to honor Genji's memory. It's inadequate, he knows. Nothing he does can bring Genji back or undo what happened, but it's all he has. This annual pilgrimage is his way of acknowledging his guilt, of refusing to let himself forget or move on. What Hanzo doesn't know during all these years is that the Shimada clan continued to exist after he left. The organization didn't simply dissolve. Other forces moved in to fill the power vacuum. And the biggest of these forces was the Hashimoto clan. The Hashimotos had been rivals of the Shimadas for decades. They were the ones who assassinated Sojiro Shimada, who set in motion the chain of events that led to the brothers' confrontation. With Hanzo gone and Genji apparently dead, the Shimada clan's power collapsed. The Hashimotos moved in, taking over Hanamura and Kanazaka, claiming the territories and operations that had once belonged to the Shimadas. Under Hashimoto control, things got worse for the people living in these areas. The Shimadas, for all their criminal activities, had maintained certain codes and responsibilities. They saw themselves as part of the community, with duties as well as privileges. The Hashimotos had no such constraints. They were purely predatory, extracting wealth and exerting control without any sense of obligation or honor. People who had served the Shimada clan found themselves in difficult positions. Some were forced to work for the Hashimotos, others resisted and suffered for it. The Yamagami family, who had served the Shimadas for generations, were particularly affected. Toshiro Yamagami, the swordsmith, was taken hostage by the Hashimotos. They wanted to force his wife, Asa, the former Shimada swordmaster, to work for them. Asa had no choice. To keep her husband alive, she had to serve the very clan that had destroyed the Shimadas. Their daughter, Kiriko, watched all this happen. She saw her parents trapped, saw her community suffering under Hashimoto rule. And she remembered the Shimada clan of her childhood, when Hanzo and Genji were still there, when things were better. She resolved to fight back, to protect her community, to reclaim Kanazaka from the Hashimotos. All of this happened without Hanzo's knowledge. He had cut himself off so completely from his past that he didn't know what had become of Hanamura or the people he had grown up with. He was trapped in his own guilt, unable to move forward, convinced that he had destroyed not just his brother, but everything his family stood for. Years passed. Hanzo continued his lonely existence, hiring himself out as an assassin, maintaining his skills, returning once a year to Hanamura to mourn. It seemed like this pattern might continue indefinitely, that Hanzo would spend the rest of his life as a ghost, neither truly living nor allowing himself to die. But then, on one of his annual visits to Shimada Castle, something happened that would change everything. Dragons. The brothers return. The Dragon's animated short is one of Overwatch's most iconic pieces of storytelling. It's the moment when the truth about Hanzo and Genji is fully revealed, when years of separation and suffering come to a head, and when the possibility of healing finally emerges. The short begins with Hanzo arriving in Hanamura for his annual pilgrimage. It's night time, and the town is quiet. Hanzo moves through the streets with the caution of someone who knows he's not welcome here, that his presence would be recognized and could cause problems. He makes his way to Shimada Castle, scaling the walls with the ease of someone who knows every inch of this place. The castle is abandoned now, neglected, a shadow of its former glory. It's a fitting mirror for Hanzo's own state. Hanzo enters the castle and goes to the place where he believes Genji died. He sets up a small shrine, lights incense, and kneels. As the smoke rises, he reflects on what happened. We hear his thoughts in voiceover, the guilt and sorrow that have defined his life, for years pouring out. I am the blade in the darkness. I am a guardian of justice, but there is still one sin that I cannot forgive, my own. Hanzo believes he can never be forgiven for what he did. The act of killing his own brother is beyond redemption in his mind. He can honor Genji's memory, can mourn him, but he can never make it right. While Hanzo is conducting his private ritual, someone else enters the castle. A figure in a cyborg ninja's armor moves through the shadows with incredible speed and grace. This intruder activates security systems, making noise, drawing attention. It's clear this person wants Hanzo to know they're there. Hanzo immediately goes into combat mode. His meditation is interrupted, and he becomes the skilled assassin and warrior he's honed himself into over the years. He draws his bow, nocks an arrow, and begins hunting for the intruder. The two play a game of cat and mouse through the castle. Hanzo is methodical, patient, using his knowledge of the building to try to corner his opponent. The intruder is faster, more mobile, always staying just out of direct confrontation. Finally, they face each other. Hanzo stands in one of the castle's gardens, the intruder perched above him. Hanzo demands to know who this person is and why they've come. The intruder doesn't answer directly. Instead, they attack. The fight that follows is breathtaking in its choreography and intensity. Hanzo and the intruder exchange blows, each demonstrating incredible skill. Hanzo's archery is precise and deadly. The intruder's close combat and agility are astonishing. But as they fight, something becomes clear to Hanzo. The intruder's fighting style is familiar. More than familiar. It's a style he's only seen one other person use. The movements, the techniques, the way they flow from one strike to the next. It's Shimada style. It's the style that Asa Yamagami taught to both him and to Genji. The realization hits Hanzo like a physical blow. But it can't be. Genji is dead. Hanzo killed him years ago. This must be someone else, someone who learned from the same teacher, or perhaps someone who studied recordings of Genji's fighting style. But doubt is creeping in. The way this person moves, the specific techniques they use, the intimate knowledge of the castle they demonstrate, it all points to one impossible conclusion. The fight intensifies. Hanzo is now fighting not just a skilled opponent, but his own growing certainty about who this person might be. He becomes more aggressive, more desperate. He needs to end this, needs to know the truth. Hanzo calls upon the ultimate Shimada technique. He draws his bow, and as he does, energy begins to coalesce around him. Blue light swirls and takes shape. The dragon spirit, the power that has been passed down through generations of shimadas, manifests itself. Ryuga waga teki wo kurao. The dragon consumes my enemies. The blue dragon spirit launches from Hanzo's bow, a massive ethereal creature of pure energy. It surges toward the intruder with devastating force. This is Hanzo's most powerful technique, something that only those of Shimada blood can perform. But then something happens that shakes Hanzo to his core. The intruder doesn't dodge. Instead, they stand their ground. Green energy begins to manifest around them. Another dragon spirit, this one green rather than blue, takes form, and as it does, the intruder calls out their own command. Ryu Jin no Kenwo Kurai. The dragon becomes me. The green dragon spirit meets the blue one. The two clash in a spectacular display of energy and light. And in that moment, Hanzo knows there is only one other person in the world who can summon a dragon spirit. Only one other person who would know that technique. The energy dissipates, the dragons fade, and standing before Hanzo, removing his mask, is Genji. He's alive. After all these years, after all the guilt and sorrow, Genji is alive. But he's changed. The cybernetic enhancements are immediately visible. Large portions of his body are mechanical. This isn't the Genji that Hanzo remembers. This is someone who has been through unimaginable transformation. Hanzo is in shock. His mind can barely process what he's seeing. "You are not the one I knew," he says, and there's so much packed into those words. It's a statement of fact about Genji's changed appearance. It's a question about whether this is really his brother or something else. It's an expression of his own disorientation. But it's also, perhaps, a defense mechanism. Because if this isn't really Genji, if this is just some cyborg wearing his brother's face, then Hanzo doesn't have to confront the full weight of what this means. Genji's response is simple and profound. I have accepted what I have become. This is the lesson that Genji learned from Zenyatta, distilled into a single sentence. He has integrated his past and present, his human and mechanical parts, his trauma and his growth. He has found peace with who he is. Hanzo cannot say the same. "You have done well, brother," he says. And there's pride there, but also distance. He's not ready to fully engage with what this revelation means. But I have done better. It's bravado, an attempt to maintain control of the situation. They face each other across the garden, two brothers separated by years of pain and completely different journeys. Genji has come back not for revenge, not to hurt Hanzo, but to offer him something far more difficult. Understanding, forgiveness, the possibility of redemption. "We could have used your help back then, Hanzo," Genji says, referencing the past, the conflict that tore them apart. There's no accusation in his voice, just a statement of fact. "But you chose to leave." Hanzo's response is defensive, almost angry. "I had to. If I stayed, I'd be a disgrace to our family's legacy." This is the rationalization he's been living with for years. He couldn't stay after what he'd done. Walking away was the only honourable choice left to him. But Genji sees through this. "Then you're still living in the past. You have learned nothing." This cuts deep. Hanzo has spent years in a kind of self-imposed penance. But Genji is right. He hasn't actually learnt anything or grown from his experience. He's just been carrying his guilt, letting it define him, using it as an excuse to remain isolated and unchanging. Genji continues, and his words are both compassionate and challenging. Real freedom is found in accepting yourself. This is the core of Zenyatta's teaching, the lesson that Genji has integrated into his life. Freedom doesn't come from running away or from punishing yourself. It comes from acceptance, from making peace with who you are and what you've done, and then choosing how to move forward. Hanzo isn't ready to hear this. "Explain your wisdom, brother," he says with bitter sarcasm. He's still in defense mode, still unable to open himself to what Genji is offering. Genji moves closer. "The world is changing once again, Hanzo, and it's time to pick a side." This is more than just a statement about global events, though it is that too. Winston has activated the recall. Overwatch is reforming. The world needs heroes again. But on a personal level, Genji is offering Hanzo a choice. He can continue to wallow in the past, continue to isolate himself in guilt and sorrow, or he can step forward into the present, can choose to do something meaningful with his skills and his life. The animated short ends without showing us Hanzo's immediate response. We don't see him accept Genji's offer or reject it outright. The ending is ambiguous, leaving us to wonder what choice Hanzo will make. But that ambiguity is important. This isn't a story that can be resolved in a single conversation. Years of trauma and guilt don't disappear because someone offers forgiveness. Hanzo's journey toward redemption, toward accepting himself and finding a new path, that's going to take time. The aftermath, separate paths. After the events of the Dragon's Short, Genji and Hanzo go their separate ways again. Genji has delivered his message. He's let Hanzo know that he's alive, that he's found peace and that there's a path forward, available if Hanzo chooses to take it. But Genji also understands that he can't force his brother to change. That's something Hanzo has to decide for himself. Genji returns to his work with Overwatch. He's answered Winston's recall and is committed to helping the organisation in its new mission. He works alongside other heroes, uses his skills to protect the innocent, and continues his own journey of growth and understanding. His time with Zenyatta gave him a foundation, but he's still learning, still evolving. We see glimpses of Genji's new life in various pieces of Overwatch media. He writes letters to Zenyatta, sharing his experiences and seeking guidance. He interacts with other heroes, forming new connections and friendships. He's particularly close to Mercy, who was there during his darkest moments and who has watched his transformation with empathy and support. There are also hints that Genji and Mercy might have a romantic connection, though this has never been confirmed explicitly. The key Christmas comic Reflections shows Mercy reading a letter that appears to have been delivered by a sparrow, which was Genji's nickname. Whether their relationship is romantic or simply a deep friendship based on shared understanding, it's clear they care for each other. Genji also maintains his connection to Zenyatta. The Omnic monk continues to guide Genji, offering wisdom and support as his student faces new challenges. They communicate regularly, and Genji often returns to the Shambali monastery when he needs clarity or simply wants to reconnect with the peace he found there. For Genji, life has found a kind of balance. He has purpose through Overwatch. He has support through his relationships with people like Zenyatta and Mercy. He has made peace with his past, though that doesn't mean he's forgotten it. The confrontation with Hanzo brought up a lot of old feelings, but Genji has the tools now to process those feelings rather than being overwhelmed by them. Hanzo's path after the confrontation is less clear. We don't have as much information about what he does immediately following the dragon's encounter. What we can infer is that he doesn't immediately join Overwatch or reach out to Genji again. The offer was made, but Hanzo isn't ready to accept it. He likely continues, much as he has been, working as an assassin, travelling the world, maintaining his solitary existence. But something has changed. The certainty that defined his guilt, the belief that he had killed his brother and could never be forgiven, that's been shaken. Genji is alive, and more than that, Genji has forgiven him. Genji isn't angry, isn't seeking revenge, isn't even particularly interested in dwelling on the past. Genji has moved on and found peace. He's offering Hanzo the same opportunity, but accepting that opportunity means confronting things that Hanzo has been avoiding for years. It means really examining what happened and why, not just accepting the simple narrative of duty and honour that he's been telling himself. It means opening himself up to other people again, forming connections, being vulnerable. It means accepting forgiveness, which is often harder than accepting punishment. Hanzo's guilt has become comfortable in a way. It's painful, certainly, but it's also familiar. It gives him structure and purpose of a sort. If he lets go of that guilt, who is he? What does he do? These are terrifying questions for someone who has been defined by guilt and isolation for years. But seeds have been planted. Genji's words, "Real freedom is found in accepting yourself," keep echoing. The image of his brother, alive and at peace despite everything he's been through, provides a contrast to Hanzo's own state. Maybe slowly, Hanzo begins to consider that there might be another way. We get hints in various Overwatch media that Hanzo is at least thinking about change. Voice lines in the game suggest he has complex feelings about Overwatch and about his own potential role. He's not hostile to the organisation, but he's also not ready to commit. He's in a liminal space, neither fully embracing his past nor fully moving into a new future. The Hashimoto Ascendancy, Kiriko's fight. While Hanzo wanders and Genji serves with Overwatch, the territories that once belonged to the Shimada clan have fallen completely under Hashimoto control, and the situation in Hanamura, and particularly Kanazaka, has deteriorated significantly. The Hashimoto clan operates differently than the Shimadas did, where the Shimadas at least maintained some sense of responsibility to their community, even within their criminal activities. The Hashimotos are purely exploitative. They extract wealth through extortion, intimidation, and violence. They have no interest in maintaining the social fabric of the areas they control. They're parasites, taking what they can and leaving communities damaged in their wake. For the people living under Hashimoto rule, life has become significantly harder. Business owners are forced to pay protection money they can barely afford. Omnics in particular are targeted and discriminated against more overtly than they were under Shimada control. Young people see no legitimate opportunities and are either forced into the criminal organisation or pushed into poverty. The Yamagami family has suffered particularly under this new regime. Toshiro Yamagami, the master swordsmith who once made weapons for the Shimada clan, has been taken hostage by the Hashimotos. They're using him as leverage to force his wife Asa to work for them. Asa Yamagami was the swordmaster of the Shimada clan, the one who trained both Hanzo and Genji in the martial arts that made them so formidable. She's a master warrior, skilled with blade and in stealth techniques. Under normal circumstances, she wouldn't need to submit to the Hashimoto's demands. She could fight them, could escape, could do any number of things, but they have her husband, and so Asa, despite her skills and her pride, has no choice but to serve the very clan that destroyed the Shimadas and brought ruin to her community. She becomes an enforcer for the Hashimotos, carrying out their orders, helping them maintain control through fear and force. This situation is devastating for Asa on multiple levels. She's betraying everything she believed in, working for people she despises, using skills that were meant to serve honor in the service of cruelty and exploitation. But what else can she do? Her husband's life depends on her compliance. Watching all of this happen is their daughter, Kiriko Yamagami. Kiriko grew up alongside Hanzo and Genji. She trained with them under her mother's instruction. She learned the same martial arts, absorbed the same traditions. She considered both Shimada brothers as older siblings of sorts, looked up to them, learned from them. When the Shimada clan fell and the Hashimotos took over, Kiriko was devastated. She watched her parents get trapped, watched her community suffer, watched everything that had been familiar and relatively stable fall apart, and she decided that she couldn't just stand by and accept this. Kiriko has advantages that most people in Kanazaka don't have. She has her mother's training in combat and stealth. She has her grandmother's spiritual connection to the fox spirit that guards Kanazaka, a connection that manifests in tangible supernatural abilities. She has friends who are willing to fight back, young people like herself who are tired of Hashimoto oppression. And so Kiriko becomes something new. She's not trying to rebuild the Shimada clan or restore the old order. She's creating a resistance movement, a group that will protect the community and fight back against the Hashimotos. Kiriko and her friends operate as a guerrilla force. They can't confront the Hashimoto's directly in open combat. The criminal organization is too large, too well armed, too entrenched. But they can disrupt operations, protect specific targets, make it costly for the Hashimoto's to maintain control. They call themselves yokai, ghosts or spirits. They strike from the shadows and disappear before the Hashimoto's can respond effectively. They wear masks to conceal their identities, protecting themselves and their families. They're careful to avoid causing collateral damage that would hurt the very people they're trying to protect. Kiriko's connection to the fox spirit is central to their efforts. Her grandmother used to serve at the Kanazaka Fox Shrine, maintaining the spiritual traditions of the area. Through her grandmother, Kiriko inherited a connection to the Kitsune, the fox spirit. This isn't just symbolic. Kiriko can actually channel the spirit's power, using it to teleport short distances, to heal injuries, and to provide supernatural speed and protection to her allies. The fox spirit in Japanese folklore is often associated with protection, wisdom, and transformation. It's a fitting symbol for what Kiriko is trying to do. She's protecting her community, using both wisdom and combat skills to oppose the Hashimoto's. And she's trying to transform the situation, to create a better future for Kanazaka. We see Kiriko's story in her animated short and in various comics and in-game materials. She's a complex character, driven by love for her community and anger at injustice, trying to honour her family's traditions while also forging her own path. Her relationship with her mother is particularly poignant. Asa knows what Kiriko is doing, knows that her daughter has become a resistance fighter. She's proud of Kiriko's courage and skill, but she's also terrified. If the Hashimoto's discover Kiriko's identity, they'll kill her, or use her as leverage, just as they're using Toshiro. Asa tries to protect Kiriko by maintaining distance, by pretending she doesn't approve of what Kiriko is doing. But in quiet moments, when they manage to see each other privately, the truth comes out. Asa supports Kiriko's fight, even though it terrifies her. She gives her daughter what guidance she can, helps her refine her techniques, tries to keep her safe while knowing she can't truly protect her. The situation is untenable in the long term. Kiriko and her friends are making a difference, protecting people and disrupting Hashimoto operations. But they're also just a small group of young people against an entire criminal organization. They're making the Hashimoto's angry, making themselves targets. Eventually, something is going to give. The Hashimoto's are actively trying to identify and eliminate the yokai resistance. They increase security, set traps, offer rewards for information. The pressure on Kiriko and her friends keeps mounting. They're walking a razor's edge, trying to help their community, while staying alive and keeping their identities secret. And all of this is happening in the shadow of the Shimada legacy. The people of Kanazaka remember when the Shimadas were in power. Some miss those days, thinking things were better then. Others are glad to see the Shimadas gone, even if what replaced them is also terrible. There are complicated feelings about whether the old ways were better, whether any criminal organization can truly be preferable to another. Kiriko herself has mixed feelings about the Shimada legacy. She loved Hanzo and Genji when they were children together. She learned from them and their family's traditions, but she also sees what the Shimada clan's criminal activities ultimately led to, the power vacuum and the violence that followed their fall. She knows that Hanzo is still alive, wandering somewhere in the world. She knows that Genji survived and is working with Overwatch. Part of her wishes they would come back, would help Kanazaka, would use their skills and their name to drive out the Hashimoto's. But another part of her understands that the solution can't be simply restoring the old order. The Shimada clan, for all its honor and tradition, was still a criminal organization that did real harm. What Kanazaka needs isn't the return of the Shimadas. It needs something new, a way forward that isn't based on criminal control, but on community strength and legitimate authority. But achieving that seems impossibly difficult when the Hashimotos have such a strong grip on power. Themes and reflections. What the Shimada story means. The story of the Shimada clan isn't just a tale of two brothers and a criminal empire. It's a narrative rich with themes that resonate far beyond the specific characters and events. Understanding these themes helps us appreciate why this story has become such a compelling part of Overwatch's lore. One of the central themes is the conflict between duty and individual identity. Both Hanzo and Genji struggled with this throughout their lives. They were born into roles they didn't choose, with expectations and responsibilities placed on them from birth. The Shimada clan's traditions were centuries old, creating enormous pressure to conform to fulfill their assigned roles regardless of personal desires or aptitude. Hanzo internalized these expectations completely. He defined himself by his duty to the clan, believing that personal desires were secondary to family obligation. This led him to make choices that destroyed him emotionally, including the decision to confront Genji violently when his brother refused to comply with clan demands. Genji, conversely, resisted these expectations. He wanted to be his own person, to find his own path. But this resistance put him at odds with his family and ultimately led to the violent confrontation that nearly killed him. Neither approach, complete submission to duty or complete rejection of it, led to a positive outcome on its own. The resolution to this conflict, as shown through Genji's journey with Zenyatta, is integration. Genji doesn't completely reject his Shimada heritage. He incorporates aspects of it into who he is, honouring the traditions and skills that have value, while also asserting his own identity and making his own choices. He accepts what he comes from, while also accepting who he has become. Hanzo's journey toward this kind of integration is slower and more painful. He needs to learn that duty without personal agency is hollow. That tradition that demands the destruction of human relationships is toxic. That honour that requires you to kill your brother is no honour at all. Another major theme is transformation and acceptance. Genji's physical transformation into a cyborg is the most obvious example, but it's really a metaphor for all the ways that trauma and experience change us. We can't go back to who we were before difficult experiences. We can only move forward as changed people. Genji's struggle to accept his cybernetic body represents the broader human experience of accepting changes we didn't choose and didn't want. Trauma, loss, disability, aging, all the ways our bodies and minds change over time, these are things we have to integrate into our sense of self. We can rail against them, can hate what we've become, or we can accept these changes and find ways to live fully despite and because of them. Zenyatta's teaching that the material of our bodies matters less than our consciousness, and choices is profound. It applies not just to cyborgs, but to everyone struggling with physical or mental changes. Our humanity, our essential self, isn't dependent on maintaining a particular physical form. It's about how we think, how we choose, how we relate to others. Hanzo also needs to accept transformation, though his is less physically visible. The person he was before killing Genji is gone. He can't go back to being the dutiful son and heir to the Shimada clan. That life is over. He needs to accept what he's become, someone who carries the weight of a terrible act, and find a way to move forward as that person rather than remaining trapped in the moment of the act itself. The theme of forgiveness runs throughout the Shimada story. Can Genji forgive Hanzo? Can Hanzo forgive himself? Can either of them forgive the Shimada clan and its toxic expectations? Can they forgive the circumstances that put them in impossible positions? Genji's forgiveness of Hanzo is the easier part, though it took years and significant personal growth. Genji came to understand that both he and Hanzo were victims of the clan's rigid structure. Hanzo did something terrible, but he was operating under enormous pressure and impossible expectations. Forgiveness doesn't mean what Hanzo did was okay. it means Genji isn't going to let anger about it define the rest of his life. Hanzo's self-forgiveness is much harder. Many people find it easier to forgive others than to forgive themselves. Hanzo's guilt serves a purpose in his psyche. It's a form of self-punishment that feels deserved. Letting go of it feels like letting himself off the hook, like saying what he did wasn't that bad. Learning that self-forgiveness doesn't mean excusing himself, but rather accepting what happened and choosing to do better going forward. That's the challenge Hanzo faces. The story also explores the toxicity of rigid traditions and hierarchies. The Shimada clan's structure, with its absolute expectations and demands for loyalty, above all else, created the conditions for tragedy. Both brothers were harmed by this system, as were many others in their orbit. There's a tension here because tradition isn't portrayed as entirely negative. The Shimada martial arts, the connection to dragon spirits, the stories and legends, these aspects of tradition have value. They connect people to their history, provide a sense of meaning, and contain real wisdom. The problem isn't tradition itself, but the way it's applied. When tradition becomes rigid, when it demands absolute obedience, when it prioritizes abstract concepts like honor and duty over human well-being and relationships, it becomes destructive. The healthier approach is to honor tradition while also adapting it, taking what has value while being willing to question and change what causes harm. This theme extends beyond the Shimada clan to broader cultural questions. Many cultures struggle with balancing respect for tradition with the need for change and adaptation. The Shimada story suggests that synthesis is possible, that we can honor our past while also creating new paths forward. Family and brotherhood are central to the Shimada narrative. The love between Hanzo and Genji is real and powerful, but it's not enough on its own to overcome the systemic problems in their family structure. Love has to be combined with understanding, with communication, with a willingness to prioritize relationship over external demands. The tragedy of the Shimada brothers is that they loved each other, but couldn't bridge the gap that clan expectations created between them. They were walking different paths, and neither could fully understand the other's perspective. When crisis came, that lack of understanding combined with external pressure led to violence. The possibility of reconciliation that Dragons offers is powerful because it suggests that even the most damaged relationships can potentially heal if both parties are willing to do the work. Genji has done his work, has found peace and understanding. Whether Hanzo can do the same remains an open question in the lore. The theme of redemption runs throughout, particularly regarding Hanzo. Can someone who has done something truly terrible be redeemed? What does redemption even look like? Is it about punishment, about suffering enough to balance the scales? Or is it about change, about becoming a better person and doing good with the rest of your life? Overwatch generally leans toward the second interpretation. Redemption isn't about suffering, but about growth and positive action. But that doesn't mean it's easy, or that it erases what was done. Hanzo can choose redemption, can choose to use his skills to help people, can choose to honor his brother's memory by becoming someone worthy of forgiveness. But he'll always carry the knowledge of what he did. Finally, there's the theme of choice and agency. Both Hanzo and Genji reach points where they must choose their paths. Genji chooses to accept his transformation and find peace. He chooses to work with Overwatch and use his skills to help people. These are active choices, not just passive acceptance of circumstance. Hanzo's choice is still pending in many ways. Dragons presents him with the option to choose differently than he has been. But choosing change, choosing growth, choosing to step out of the comfortable misery of guilt, that's difficult. The narrative leaves open whether Hanzo will make that choice. This emphasis on choice is important because it pushes back against determinism. The Shimada brothers aren't doomed by their circumstances or their family history. They have agency. They can choose their paths. The legend of the two dragon brothers might seem like a prophecy that they're fated to fulfill, but the story suggests otherwise. They can choose to write a different ending, one where the brothers find their way back to each other. The current state. Where things stand now. As we reach the current moment in Overwatch's timeline, which is to say the events of Overwatch 2 and the most recent lore developments, the situation for all parties involved in the Shimada story is still very much in flux. Genji is actively working with the new Overwatch. He was one of the heroes who answered Winston's recall without hesitation. He's been involved in major operations, including the mission to Paris to stop Null Sector's attack. He fights alongside other heroes, combining his unique skills with the team's broader capabilities. Genji has found his place in this new Overwatch. He's not just a weapon anymore, as he was in his Blackwatch days. He's a hero in the truest sense, someone who uses his abilities to protect the innocent and make the world better. His journey from broken cyborg filled with rage to peaceful warrior who protects life is complete in many ways, though he continues to grow and evolve. His relationships with other Overwatch members seem positive. He works well with Winston, with Tracer, with the other heroes. There's mutual respect and camaraderie. These aren't just colleagues. They're something like a new family, replacing the toxic family structure he came from, with one based on choice and shared values. Genji also maintains his connection to Zenyatta, who has also joined the new Overwatch effort. Having his teacher and mentor nearby provides Genji with continued support and guidance. Their relationship seems to have evolved into something more like peer friendship, though Zenyatta will always be Genji's master in important ways. The question of whether Genji will return to Japan, whether he'll get involved in the situation in Kanazaka, whether he'll reach out to Hanzo again, these remain open. Genji has said what he needed to say to his brother. Now it's up to Hanzo to decide how to respond. Hanzo's current status is less clear. We don't have a lot of recent lore showing what he's been up to since the Dragon's encounter. He doesn't appear to have joined Overwatch officially, at least not yet, but there are hints that he's moving in that direction, that he's at least considering it. In-game voice lines and interactions suggest that Hanzo has had some contact with Overwatch. He knows about the organisation's return. He's aware of what they're doing. Other heroes have opinions about him, suggesting they've met or at least know of him. But he hasn't committed fully. This makes sense for Hanzo's character. He's not someone who makes quick decisions about major life changes. He needs time to process, to think, to work through his internal conflicts. The confrontation with Genji was a huge turning point, but turning points don't instantly resolve years of trauma and guilt. What seems likely is that Hanzo is slowly moving toward a decision to use his skills for something positive. He may not be ready to fully embrace Overwatch or to openly reconcile with Genji, but the seeds have been planted. He's questioning his isolation and his self-punishment. He's seeing that there might be other paths available. There's also the question of whether Hanzo will return to Japan and get involved in the situation there. He walked away from Hanamura and Kanazaka years ago, but that doesn't mean he stopped caring about what happens there. If he learned about the Hashimoto takeover, about how the people he once knew are suffering, would he feel obligated to intervene? Kiriko and the resistance in Kanazaka continue their fight against the Hashimotos. They've had some successes protecting vulnerable community members and disrupting criminal operations. But the situation remains dangerous and unsustainable. Kiriko knows about Overwatch's return. She's heard that Genji is part of the organization. She may even know that Hanzo is alive and wandering somewhere, but she hasn't reached out to them. She's handling things herself, relying on her own skills and her friends' support. There's potential here for a major storyline where these threads come together. Imagine Kiriko reaching a point where the Hashimotos are close to discovering her identity or eliminating the resistance. She might call for help, reaching out to Overwatch. Genji would certainly respond to a call from Kanazaka. He has history there, connections to the place and its people, And if Genji gets involved, would Hanzo follow? Would he overcome his reluctance to engage with his past if it meant protecting people he once knew? Could the three of them, Genji, Hanzo, and Kiriko, work together to liberate Kanazaka from the Hashimotos? Such a mission would be more than just a military operation. It would be an emotional journey for all involved. Genji would be returning to places that hold difficult memories. Hanzo would be confronting his past directly instead of keeping it at arm's length. Kiriko would be meeting her childhood friends again, now as adults, and warriors rather than children playing together. There are also questions about the broader Shimada legacy. Is the Shimada clan truly gone, or could it be rebuilt in some form? If so, what would that look like? Could there be a new Shimada organization that maintains the positive aspects of the tradition, the honor and discipline and spiritual connection, while rejecting the criminal activities and toxic hierarchies? Hanzo is technically still the head of the Shimada clan, even though he walked away. If he chose to reclaim that role, if he decided to try to rebuild the clan on a better foundation, it could provide a path forward for Kanazaka and Hanamura. But would he want that? Would Genji support it? What would it mean to be a Shimada in the modern world without the criminal empire? These are open questions that Overwatch's ongoing narrative could explore in fascinating ways. The Asa and Toshiro situation. We should spend some time focusing on Asa and Toshiro Yamagami because their situation is particularly tragic and underexplored in discussions of the Shimada law. Asa Yamagami served the Shimada clan faithfully for her entire life, as her family had done for generations. She was the clan's swordmaster, responsible for training the next generation, including Hanzo and Genji. This wasn't just a job, it was a calling, a responsibility that came with honor and respect. Aisa took her role seriously. She taught not just combat techniques but also the philosophy and discipline that should guide a warrior. She understood the weight of the traditions she was passing on. She saw potential in her students and worked to help them realize it. When the Shimada clan fell apart after the confrontation between Hanzo and Genji, Asa lost her position and her purpose in many ways. The organization she had served no longer existed in any meaningful form. The boys she had trained had either walked away or disappeared. The structure that had given her life meaning was gone. But Asa is a survivor and a warrior. She would have adapted, found new ways to use her skills, perhaps focused on teaching her own daughter, Kiriko. She and Toshiro could have built a quiet life away from the criminal world, using their skills for legitimate purposes. The Hashimoto takeover destroyed that possibility. When the rival clans seized control of the region, they specifically targeted people who had served the Shimadas. Some of this was revenge, some was practical, wanting to neutralize potential opposition. Some was about asserting dominance, showing that the old order was completely overthrown. Toshiro was taken hostage because his skills as a swordsmith were valuable. The Hashimotos wanted him to make weapons for them, just as he had once made weapons for the Shimadas. But more than that, holding him hostage gave them leverage over Asa. They knew Asa's reputation. They knew her capabilities. They understood that she could be a significant threat to their control if she chose to oppose them. So they used the most effective tool available to them, threatening someone she loves. Asa was faced with an impossible choice. She could fight back, could use her considerable skills to oppose the Hashimotos. But doing so would almost certainly result in Toshiro's death. Or she could submit, could become an enforcer for the very people who had destroyed the Shimadas and were oppressing her community. She chose to submit, not because she lacked courage, but because she loved her husband more than she hated the Hashimotos. It's a devastating choice, one that forces her to betray her own values and use her skills in service of cruelty and oppression. The psychological toll on Asa must be immense. Every day she wakes up and has to do things she despises. She enforces the Hashimoto's will, hurts people who might be innocent, helps maintain a system of oppression. And she does all of this while knowing that the students she once trained, Hanzo and Genji, are out there somewhere, potentially able to help but completely unaware of her situation. There's also the complication of her relationship with Kiriko. Asa knows what her daughter is doing. She knows Kiriko has become a resistance fighter, taking enormous risks to protect their community. As a mother, Asa is terrified for Kiriko's safety. As a warrior who once believed in honor and justice, she's proud of her daughter's courage. But Asa can't help Kiriko openly. If the Hashimotos discover the connection, if they learn that the woman who's supposed to be their enforcer has a daughter who's leading resistance against them, both Kiriko and Toshiro would be in immediate danger. So Asa has to maintain distance from Kiriko publicly, has to pretend she doesn't approve of what her daughter is doing. She might even have to go through motions of trying to stop the resistance activities, though she would certainly be careful not to actually harm Kiriko or her friends. In private moments, when they can meet secretly, the truth comes out. Asa can express her pride in Kiriko, can offer guidance and training, can be a mother to her daughter. But these moments must be rare and carefully hidden. Toshiro's situation is different, but equally terrible. He's being held prisoner, forced to create weapons that will be used to oppress his own community. As a craftsman, he takes pride in his work. The swords he makes are works of art, beautiful and functional. But now that artistry is being perverted, used for purposes he despises, he may not even know exactly what Asa is being forced to do to keep him alive. He might suspect, might have pieced together from things his captors say or don't say. That knowledge would be its own burden. Asa is suffering because of him, is betraying everything she believes in to keep him alive. Does he wish she would just let him die? Does he try to convince his captors that he's not valuable enough to use as leverage? Or does he cling to life, hoping that somehow this situation can be resolved, that they can both survive and rebuild? The Yamagami family situation represents the human cost of the Shimada clan's fall. It's not just about two brothers and their conflict. It's about all the people whose lives were built around the Shimada organization, who lost their places when it fell apart, who were caught in the power struggle that followed. Any resolution to the Kanezaka situation has to address what happens to Asa and Toshiro. They need to be freed, need to be reunited, need to be given the chance to build the quiet life they should have been able to have years ago. But achieving that will require confronting the Hashimotos directly and defeating them decisively enough that they can't retaliate. Kiriko's generation. A new path forward. Kiriko represents something important in the Shimada narrative. The next generation's attempt to forge a different path forward. She's not trying to restore the Shimada clan or recreate the old power structure. She's creating something new, something that takes inspiration from the past but isn't bound by it. Kiriko's approach to protecting Kanezaka is grassroots and community-focused. She's not acting as a leader who makes decisions for others. She's working alongside her community, protecting people where she can, disrupting oppression, but always staying connected to the ordinary people she's trying to help. This is a deliberate contrast to how the Shimada clan operated. The Shimadas were hierarchical, operating from above, making decisions that affected thousands of people without necessarily consulting them. Even when they believed they were protecting their community, there was a distance, a sense that they were the protectors and everyone else was the protected. Kiriko doesn't maintain that distance. She lives in an apartment in Kanezaka. She shops at local stores. She knows her neighbours. She's part of the community in a way that Hanzo and Genji, growing up in Shimada Castle, never were. When she fights, she's fighting for people she knows personally, for places she goes every day. Her friends and allies in the resistance are the same. They're young people from the community who are tired of being victimised and have decided to fight back. They're not trained warriors or members of some elite organization. They're just people who care about their home and each other. This makes them vulnerable in some ways. They don't have the resources or training that the Hashimotos have. But it also makes them resilient. They're motivated by genuine connection rather than fear or greed. They know the territory intimately. They have the support of community members who protect them by not giving information to the Hashimotos. Kiriko's connection to the fox spirit adds an interesting dimension. In Japanese folklore, fox spirits are liminal creatures existing between the mundane and supernatural worlds. They're associated with protection, but also with transformation and change. They can be mischievous, challenging the status quo. All of these associations fit with what Kiriko's trying to do. She's protecting her community, yes, but she's also trying to transform the situation, to create change. She's challenging the established power structure. She exists in the liminal space between the old Shimada order and whatever will come next, between ordinary citizen and supernatural warrior. Her grandmother's connection to the Fox Shrine is important. It suggests that there are spiritual dimensions to Kanezaka that go beyond any criminal organization's control. The Fox spirit was there before the Shimadas rose to power, will be there after the Hashimotos are gone. It represents a continuity of place and community that transcends the immediate political situation. Kiriko is also interesting as someone who exists between two worlds in another sense. She trained with Hanzo and Genji, learned from the Shimada clan's traditions, was shaped by that environment, but she also has her own identity separate from the Shimadas. She's not trying to be a Shimada heir or to claim their legacy. She's herself, using what she learned but applying it in her own way. This makes her potentially the perfect bridge between the Shimada past and whatever future might emerge. She understands and respects the traditions, but she's not trapped by them. She knows both Hanzo and Genji as people, not just as legendary figures. If they do eventually return to Japan, Kiriko could help them understand the current situation and work with them to create real, lasting change. Kiriko's friends are also important. Characters like Ryota and Sakura represent ordinary people stepping up to defend their community. They don't have supernatural powers or decades of martial arts training. They have courage and commitment, and sometimes that's enough. Their relationship with Kiriko is egalitarian. She's not their leader in a hierarchical sense. She's a member of the team, perhaps the most skilled, but not operating above or separate from the others. They make decisions together, plan operations together, support each other. It's a model of organization that's fundamentally different from either the Shimada or Hashimoto structures. This collective approach has strengths and weaknesses. It's more democratic, more responsive to community needs. But it can also be slower to act, can have trouble with coordination, can struggle when quick, decisive action is needed. As the resistance has grown, Kiriko and her friends have had to navigate these challenges. How do they maintain their grassroots, community-connected approach while also becoming more effective as a fighting force? How do they organize without becoming the kind of hierarchical structure they're opposing? These are questions without easy answers, and the Overwatch narrative hasn't fully explored them yet. But they're important questions about how communities resist oppression and what forms that resistance should take. The spiritual dimension, dragons, foxes, and meaning. The Shimada story is notable for incorporating genuine supernatural elements into what is otherwise a relatively grounded narrative about family conflict and criminal organizations. The dragon spirits and the fox spirit aren't just metaphorical, they're real entities with tangible power. The dragon spirits that Hanzo and Genji can summon are connected to Shimada bloodline, but they're more than just genetic quirks. They represent a spiritual connection to something ancient and powerful. The legend of the two dragon brothers suggests these spirits have been associated with the Shimada family for many generations, perhaps centuries. In Eastern philosophy and mythology, dragons often represent powerful natural forces, wisdom, and transformation. They're associated with water, with storms, with the fundamental forces that shape the world. They're not good or evil inherently, but rather powerful and neutral, capable of great destruction or great protection, depending on how they're directed. The Shimada dragons come in two colours, blue for Hanzo and green for Genji. This colour difference might represent different aspects of draconic power, or it might represent the brothers' different natures. Blue is often associated with loyalty, stability, responsibility. Green is associated with growth, renewal, change. These associations fit the brothers' characters. Hanzo is defined by loyalty to tradition and responsibility, even when that loyalty becomes toxic. Genji underwent profound transformation and found renewal, grew into something new. The dragons they summon reflect who they are. The fact that both brothers can summon dragons is significant. Initially, Hanzo believed he was the only one who could, that perhaps killing Genji had severed his brother's connection to this ancestral power. Discovering in dragons that Genji could still summon a dragon spirit proved that Genji was still a Shimada despite everything that had happened. That transformation and change didn't sever the fundamental connection to family and heritage. The fox spirit that Kiriko channels is different in character, but similarly powerful. Fox spirits in Japanese mythology are complex entities. They can be benevolent protectors or mischievous tricksters. They're associated with the Inari deity, with protection, with transformation and illusion. The fox spirit of Kanazaka seems to be primarily protective, watching over the community and those who maintain the shrine. Kiriko's grandmother served the shrine and through her service maintained a connection that passed to Kiriko. This isn't about bloodline in the same way the dragon spirits are. It's about devotion, about service, about maintaining traditional connections. Kiriko's abilities, channeled through the fox spirit, teleportation, healing, supernatural speed, are different from Hanzo and Genji's dragon-based powers. They're more about protection and support than direct combat. This fits with Kiriko's role as a community protector, rather than a warrior trained for assassination and combat. The presence of these spiritual elements in the Overwatch narrative does several things. First, it grounds the story in specific cultural contexts. The dragon spirits connect to Chinese and Japanese mythology and philosophy. The fox spirit is specifically Japanese. These aren't generic magic powers, but culturally specific spiritual traditions. Second, it suggests that there are dimensions to the Overwatch world beyond technology and physical combat. There are old powers, spiritual forces that have existed long before the modern era and will continue long after. Not everything can be explained or controlled through scientific understanding. Third, it gives the characters connections to something larger than themselves. Hanzo and Genji aren't just skilled fighters. They're bearers of an ancient spiritual power. Kiriko isn't just a trained warrior. She's a conduit for a protective spirit that watches over her community. This gives their conflicts and choices added weight and significance. The spiritual dimension also offers paths to healing and integration. Genji's journey with Zenyatta involved meditation and spiritual exploration, seeking to understand consciousness and existence at a fundamental level. This wasn't just therapy, it was a spiritual journey that helped him integrate his experiences and find peace. For Hanzo, engagement with the spiritual aspects of his heritage might offer a way forward. The legend of the two dragon brothers is ultimately about the tragedy of severed brotherhood, about the elder brother's eternal sorrow. But legends can be reinterpreted, can be changed. What if the two brothers could find a way to reunite, to heal the rift? What would that mean for the dragon spirits themselves? These are open questions that the narrative could explore, but they suggest that the spiritual elements aren't just window dressing. They're integral to understanding the characters and their potential paths forward. Parallels and contrasts: Shimada family versus other Overwatch families. Looking at the Shimada family story in the broader context of Overwatch lore reveals interesting parallels and contrasts with other family narratives in the game. The Lindholm family, Torbjorn and Brigitte, represents a healthy family dynamic. Torbjorn is protective of his daughter, but ultimately respects her choices and her agency. Brigitte chooses to follow in her father's footsteps, not because she's forced to, but because she genuinely wants to. They work together as equals, supporting each other. Their family bonds strengthen them rather than tearing them apart. The contrast with the Shimadas is stark. Where Torbjorn and Brigitte communicate openly and honestly, Hanzo and Genji struggle to truly talk to each other, especially as adults. Where the Lindholms respect each other's choices, the Shimada clan demanded compliance with predetermined roles. The Lindholm family shows what healthy family dynamics can look like, making the Shimada tragedy seem even more painful in comparison. The Amari family, Anna and Farah, is more complicated. Anna's decision to hide from her family after being shot created distance and pain. Farah grew up believing her mother was dead, carrying that loss with her. When they reunite, there's joy but also anger and hurt. Anna kept secrets that affected Farah's life profoundly. However, the Amari family ultimately moves toward reconciliation. Anna and Farah work through their issues, communicate, find a way forward. It's not perfect or easy, but they do the work of repairing their relationship. This shows that family damage can be healed if both parties are willing to be vulnerable and honest with each other. The Shimada brothers have potential for similar reconciliation, but they're not there yet. Genji has done his part, has forgiven, and is ready to move forward. Hanzo is still stuck, still processing. Whether they can reach the point where they truly reconnect remains to be seen. The Kolomar family is represented only by Sombra, and what we know of her family is mostly absence. She was orphaned by the Omnic crisis, left to survive on her own, shaped by that abandonment. She's someone who learned she couldn't trust in family or authority, who had to make her own way through cunning and self-reliance. Sombra's story contrasts with the Shimadas in that they had too much family pressure and expectation, while she had none. Both extremes caused damage. The Shimadas were crushed by the weight of tradition and duty. Sombra was adrift without connections or support. Neither extreme is healthy. The Morrison and Reyes relationship, while not biological family, functioned as a kind of brotherhood. They were close friends and colleagues who became estranged and eventually enemies. Their story parallels the Shimada brothers in some ways. Both involved relationships destroyed by duty, pressure, and ultimately violence. The key difference is that Morrison and Reyes were peers operating within a professional structure, while Hanzo and Genji were brothers in a family hierarchy. But both stories show how external pressures and poor communication can destroy even the closest relationships. Looking at these parallels helps us understand what makes the Shimada story distinctive. It's the most explicitly focused on family dysfunction and the damage caused by rigid expectations. It's the most tragic in terms of the violence that erupts between family members, and it has the most explicit path to redemption laid out, with Genji's journey showing what healing can look like, and Hanzo's journey representing the difficult work of getting there. The future possible directions for the Shimada story. As Overwatch's narrative continues to develop, there are numerous possible directions for the Shimada storyline. None of these are confirmed, but they represent logical extensions of the threads that have been established. The most obvious possibility is a major storyline involving the liberation of Kanazaka from the Hashimotos. This could bring together Kiriko's resistance, Genji's capabilities and Overwatch support, and potentially Hanzo's skills and connection to the region. Such a story could work on multiple levels. On the surface, it would be an action-focused narrative about taking down a criminal organization and freeing an oppressed community. But it would also be deeply personal for everyone involved. For Genji, returning to the region where he grew up, seeing how things have changed, confronting the legacy of his family's organization. All of this would be emotionally charged. He would be working to help people he knew as a child, protecting a community that his family once controlled. For Hanzo, if he participates, this would be the ultimate confrontation with his past. He walked away from the Shimada clan and from Hanamura and Kanazaka. Returning would mean acknowledging what happened, seeing the consequences of his family's fall, and choosing actively to make amends. For Kiriko, working with the legendary Shimada brothers would be surreal. These are people she knew as children, people she looked up to. Seeing them as adults, as warriors, as complicated people with their own trauma and journeys would change her understanding of them and of the Shimada legacy. The operational details of such a mission would be interesting. The Hashimotos are entrenched, well-armed, and have hostages including Toshiro. Simply attacking them directly could result in civilian casualties and hostage deaths. The team would need to be strategic, using Kiriko's local knowledge, Genji's infiltration skills, and possibly Hanzo's tactical planning. There's also the question of what happens after the Hashimotos are defeated. Who fills the power vacuum? Does some form of legitimate authority take over? Does the community organize to govern itself? Does the Shimada name factor into whatever comes next? This leads to another possible storyline, the rebirth of the Shimada clan on a new foundation. What if Hanzo decided to reclaim his family's name and tradition, but strip away the criminal elements? What if the Shimada clan became a force for protection and justice rather than crime? This would be complicated and controversial. Many people suffered under Shimada rule, even if it was less oppressive than what the Hashimotos brought. Can a name associated with crime and violence be reclaimed and redeemed? Is it even desirable to try? But there's precedent in the law for organizations reforming and finding new purposes. Overwatch itself fell and was reborn with a new mission and structure. Why couldn't the Shimada clan undergo a similar transformation? Such a story would require Hanzo to do profound work. He would need to acknowledge the harm his family caused, while also identifying what about the Shimada tradition has value. He would need to build something new, while honoring what was good about the past. It would be the ultimate expression of the integration that Genji achieved personally applied to an entire organization and legacy. Genji's role in such a rebirth would be interesting. He walked away from the Shimada clan and found his own path. Would he support Hanzo trying to rebuild it? Would he want to be involved? Or would he prefer to maintain his current life with Overwatch? There's potential for conflict here. Good dramatic conflict, where both sides have valid points. Genji might worry that any attempt to rebuild the clan would replicate old problems. Hanzo might feel that it's his responsibility to try, that walking away was a mistake, and he needs to make amends by creating something better. Another possibility is a storyline focused specifically on Hanzo's decision to join Overwatch officially. This could be a more personal, character-focused narrative about him finally accepting Genji's offer and stepping into a new role. Such a story would need to address Hanzo's internal conflicts. What finally pushes him to make that choice? Is it a specific event, a particular crisis where his skills are needed? Is it a gradual realization that isolation isn't serving him anymore? Is it Genji or another character reaching out one more time in just the right way? Joining Overwatch would be a huge step for Hanzo. It would mean accepting that he can use his skills for good, that he's not irredeemable, that he can be part of something larger than himself again. It would mean working alongside his brother, potentially daily, which would be both healing and challenging. Other Overwatch members would have opinions about Hanzo joining. Some might be welcoming, seeing his skills and potential. Others might be skeptical given his past. Hanzo would need to prove himself, to show that he's committed to Overwatch's mission and values. The dynamics between Hanzo and Genji as teammates would be fascinating to explore. They would need to learn to communicate as adults, to work through years of separation, and different life experiences. They couldn't just pick up where they left off as children. They would need to get to know each other again, to understand who they've become. There's potential for beautiful character moments in such a story. Imagine Hanzo and Genji on a mission together, working in perfect synchronization because of their shared training and history. Or imagine quiet moments where they talk about their journeys, where Hanzo learns about Genji's time with Zenyatta, and Genji learns about Hanzo's years of wandering. These conversations wouldn't all be easy. There would be difficult moments, times when old wounds resurface, times when they misunderstand each other or struggle to bridge the gap. But working through those difficulties together would be part of the healing process. Another storyline possibility involves exploring the Shimada clan's history more deeply. We know very little about the clan before Sojiro's generation. Who were their ancestors? How far back does the dragon spirit connection go? What other legends and stories shaped the family? A narrative could involve discovering hidden Shimada artifacts, ancient texts, or other historical elements that shed light on the family's origins. This could provide context for understanding why the clan operated as it did, what values they originally held, and how things changed over time. Such a story could also introduce new characters, perhaps other distant Shimada relatives or people who served the clan in previous generations. These characters could offer different perspectives on what the Shimada name means and what it could mean going forward. There's also the possibility of exploring what happened to other members of the Shimada organization after the clan fell. We know about Asa and Toshiro, but there were certainly many others who served the Shimadas in various capacities. Where are they now? How have they adapted to the changing situation? Some might have joined the Hashimotos out of necessity or pragmatism. Others might have scattered, finding new lives elsewhere. Some might be in hiding, waiting for an opportunity to act. These people could be allies or obstacles depending on their experiences and loyalties. A storyline could involve Hanzo or Genji encountering these former Shimada members and having to deal with their reactions. Some might blame the brothers for the clan's fall. Others might see them as the rightful leaders and expect them to restore order. These encounters would force both brothers to confront how their actions affected many people beyond just themselves. The meta-narrative. What the Shimada story says about Overwatch. Stepping back from the specific plot and characters, the Shimada story functions as a microcosm of broader themes that run throughout Overwatch's narrative. Understanding these connections helps us see why this particular storyline resonates so strongly with fans. One major theme across Overwatch is the question of redemption and second chances. Many Overwatch characters have dark pasts or have made serious mistakes. Widowmaker was turned into an assassin against her will. Reaper underwent a transformation that made him a monster. Soldier 76 operates in moral grey areas. Mercy questions whether her medical innovations have been used properly. The question the narrative repeatedly asks is whether people can change, can grow beyond their pasts, can choose to do better. The Shimada story engages with this question directly. Genji shows that transformation is possible, that even someone who has been broken and rebuilt can find peace and purpose. Hanzo represents the difficulty of that transformation, the way guilt and shame can trap us even when forgiveness is offered. Another recurring theme is the tension between individual identity and organizational demands. Overwatch as an organization struggled with this, ultimately falling apart partially because individual agendas and moral conflicts couldn't be resolved within its structure. The Petras Act that banned Overwatch represented society's judgment that the organization had become too powerful, too unaccountable. The Shimada clan had similar issues. It demanded absolute loyalty and subsumed individual identity to family duty. This created immense pressure on people like Hanzo and Genji, who struggled to reconcile their personal desires with clan expectations. The clan's fall shows what happens when rigid organisations can't adapt to accommodate individual needs and values. The new Overwatch, the one being rebuilt in the current timeline, is trying to do things differently. It's more voluntary, more flexible, more willing to let individuals maintain their own identities and moral compasses while working toward common goals. Whether this approach will succeed remains to be seen, but it represents learning from past mistakes. The Shimada story also engages with questions about tradition and modernity that run throughout Overwatch's world. The game's setting is a near future where advanced technology exists alongside traditional cultures and practices. Characters constantly navigate between honouring the past and adapting to new realities. Genji's cyborg nature makes this tension literal. He's a fusion of ancient ninja traditions and cutting-edge technology. His journey involved learning that these elements don't have to be in conflict, that he can honour tradition while also embracing his modified nature. He represents synthesis, the possibility of bridging old and new. Hanzo initially represents resistance to change, clinging to traditional concepts of honour and duty even when they cause suffering. His potential growth involves learning to adapt, to take what has value from tradition while being willing to question and change what doesn't serve. Family and chosen family is another major theme across Overwatch. Many characters have complicated relationships with their biological families, but find connection and belonging with other Overwatch members. Tracer and Winston's friendship, Reinhardt and Brigitte's mentorship, Mercy's professional relationships that become genuine care, these represent chosen family bonds. The Shimada story shows both the strength and fragility of family bonds. Blood connection is powerful, it shapes identity and creates deep emotional ties, but blood alone isn't enough. Family has to be maintained through communication, respect, and genuine care. When those elements are missing, even the closest family relationships can shatter. The possibility of reconciliation between Hanzo and Genji represents hope that damaged family bonds can be repaired. But it also shows that repair requires work from all parties. Genji has done his work. Hanzo needs to do his. Only then can they truly be brothers again. The theme of identity, particularly how trauma and transformation affect sense of self, is central to many Overwatch characters. Genji's struggle with his cyborg body is the most obvious example, but it connects to broader questions about who we are when circumstances force us to change. Ana struggled with her identity after being presumed dead, questioning whether she could or should return to her old life. Soldier 76 operates under a mask, hiding his true identity while pursuing his mission. Reaper has become so transformed, he barely seems human anymore. All of these characters are asking variations of the same question. If I've changed so much, am I still me? The Shimada story suggests that identity is something we construct and reconstruct throughout our lives. Genji isn't the same person he was before the confrontation with Hanzo, but he's still Genji. He's integrated his past and present into a coherent sense of self. Hanzo is stuck because he's trying to hold on to an identity, the dutiful son and clan heir, that no longer exists. He needs to construct a new identity that acknowledges what happened and allows him to move forward. Fan engagement. Why this story resonates. The Shimada storyline is one of the most popular aspects of Overwatch lore among fans. Understanding why it resonates so strongly tells us something about what makes effective storytelling and what audiences are looking for in narratives. First, the story is deeply emotional. It deals with primal themes, family, betrayal, grief, forgiveness that everyone can relate to on some level. Most people haven't literally fought their siblings to the death, but many people have experienced family conflict, have felt torn between duty and desire, have struggled with guilt over hurting someone they love. The emotional authenticity of the Shimada story allows fans to connect with it personally. They see their own family dynamics reflected, albeit in more dramatic form. They understand the pain of feeling like you failed someone important. They recognize the difficulty of forgiveness, both giving and receiving it. Second, the story is tragic in a classical sense. There's a sense of inevitability to the confrontation between Hanzo and Genji, driven by the intersection of their personalities, family expectations, and circumstance. We can see how things went wrong, can identify the points where different choices might have led to different outcomes. This gives the tragedy depth and makes it feel meaningful rather than arbitrary. But unlike purely tragic stories, the Shimada narrative also offers hope for redemption and healing. Genji's transformation from broken, angry cyborg to peaceful warrior shows that recovery is possible. The reconciliation scene in Dragons suggests that even the most damaged relationships might be repaired. This combination of tragedy and hope is emotionally satisfying in ways that pure tragedy or pure optimism aren't. Third, the characters are complex and morally nuanced. Neither Hanzo nor Genji is simply right or wrong. Both made understandable choices, given their circumstances. Both suffered. Both deserve empathy, even when they make mistakes. This complexity makes them feel like real people rather than archetypes. Fans particularly appreciate that the narrative doesn't simply forgive Hanzo for what he did. He has to live with the consequences of his actions, has to do the work of changing and growing. But it also doesn't condemn him as irredeemable. There's a path forward for him if he chooses to take it. This nuanced approach to accountability and redemption resonates with audiences. Fourth, the cultural specificity of the story adds richness. The Japanese setting, the incorporation of authentic mythology and philosophy, the aesthetic choices in character design and environments, all of this grounds the story in a real cultural context. Fans who are familiar with Japanese culture and traditions find additional layers of meaning. Fans who aren't learn something new and get exposed to cultural perspectives they might not have encountered otherwise. The use of Japanese language in key moments, particularly the dragon spirit summonings, adds authenticity and power. These aren't just cool catchphrases. They're meaningful statements in the character's native language that reinforce their cultural identity. Fifth, the story is told across multiple media in ways that complement each other. The Dragons animated short is a beautiful, standalone piece of animation that conveys emotion through visual storytelling. The comics provide additional context and character development. In-game voice lines add small details that enrich our understanding. This multimedia approach allows fans to engage with the story at different levels and through different formats. Fans also appreciate that the story isn't fully resolved. There are open questions and future possibilities. This allows for speculation, discussion, and creative fan works. The Overwatch community has produced countless fan comics, fan fiction, and fan art exploring various aspects of the Shimada story, filling in gaps and imagining possible futures. The relationship between Hanzo and Genji has also resonated strongly with fans who see parallels to their own sibling relationships. The mix of love, rivalry, misunderstanding, and potential for reconciliation feels authentic to many people's experiences. Even fans who don't have siblings often connect with the broader themes about family and forgiveness. There's also something compelling about characters who are trying to overcome their pasts and find new purposes. In a world where many people struggle with anxiety, depression, trauma, and questions of identity, seeing characters like Genji work through similar struggles and find peace is genuinely inspiring. Hanzo's ongoing struggle is relatable too. The difficulty of change, the way guilt can trap us, the challenge of accepting forgiveness. The Shimada story also benefits from excellent character design and voice acting. Both Hanzo and Genji have distinctive, memorable appearances that reflect their personalities and journeys. The voice actors bring depth and emotion to their performances, making key scenes genuinely moving. When Hanzo says, "I am the blade in the darkness," or when Genji says, "I have accepted what I have become," the delivery makes these lines resonate. The community has embraced these characters in ways that go beyond simply enjoying their stories. Hanzo and Genji have become symbols of certain ideas and experiences. Genji represents overcoming adversity and finding peace. Hanzo represents the struggle with guilt and the difficulty of change. Fans identify with these symbolic meanings and incorporate them into how they understand their own lives. Influences and inspirations. The Shimada stories. Roots. The Shimada narrative draws from a rich tradition of stories about honor, family, and redemption. Understanding these influences helps us appreciate the depth and craft that went into creating this storyline. The most obvious influence is Japanese culture and mythology, particularly stories about samurai and ninja. The concepts of honor, duty, and loyalty that drive Hanzo's character are fundamental to samurai tradition. The idea that personal desires should be subordinated to duty, that death is preferable to dishonor, these are authentic elements of historical samurai culture. The ninja traditions that both brothers embody also have historical roots, though heavily mythologized in popular culture. The skills they demonstrate, stealth, precision, martial arts mastery, connect to real practices of historical ninja clans. The Shimada clan itself resembles historical ninja clans that operated as semi-independent powers, offering their services while maintaining their own territories and traditions. The legend of the two dragon brothers is an original creation for Overwatch, but it draws on common patterns in mythology. Stories of feuding brothers appear across cultures, from Cain and Abel to Romulus and Remus. These stories often explore themes of jealousy, conflict, and the tragedy of family bonds broken. Dragon mythology specifically is deeply important in East Asian cultures. Dragons represent power, wisdom, and natural forces. They're not evil monsters as they often are in Western tradition, but rather complex beings that can be either benevolent or destructive depending on how they're approached. The Shimada dragons reflect this traditional understanding. There are also influences from popular media that has explored similar themes. Japanese samurai films, particularly the works of Akira Kurosawa, often dealt with questions of honor, duty, and the costs of violence. The aesthetic and emotional tone of the Dragon's Short owes something to this tradition of cinematic storytelling. Anime and manga have also explored stories of brothers in conflict, of characters struggling with identity and transformation, of the tension between tradition and modernity. Series like Naruto, Full Metal Alchemist, and many others have covered similar thematic ground. The Overwatch team was certainly aware of these works and likely drew inspiration from them. The cyberpunk genre's exploration of what it means to be human when your body is extensively modified clearly influences Genji's storyline. Works like Ghost in the Shell have deeply explored questions of identity, consciousness, and humanity in the context of cybernetic enhancement. Genji's struggle with his cyborg nature and his eventual acceptance echo these themes. There are also influences from Western storytelling traditions. The prodigal son narrative, where someone who has strayed returns and must be reconciled with family, appears in many forms across Western literature and religious tradition. Genji's return to confront Hanzo carries echoes of this pattern. The redemption arc, where a character who has done terrible things seeks to atone and become better, is fundamental to many Western stories. Hanzo's potential journey follows this pattern. The question of whether he can or will achieve redemption drives his narrative forward. Greek tragedy offers another lens for understanding the Shimada story. The concept of hamartia, a fatal flaw or error in judgment that leads to a character's downfall, applies to both brothers. Hanzo's excessive devotion to duty, Genji's rejection of responsibility. These character traits set them on a collision course. The tragic irony is that both were trying to do what they thought was right. Buddhist philosophy, particularly as it's practiced in Zen Buddhism, heavily influences Genji's journey with Zenyatta. The emphasis on acceptance, on being present, on understanding the nature of suffering and attachment, these are core Buddhist concepts. Genji's path to peace follows a genuinely Buddhist framework, not just using superficial Asian aesthetics, but engaging with actual philosophical principles. The concept of mushin, or no mind, in martial arts philosophy also relates to Genji's development. This is a state of mental clarity where you react without conscious thought, where technique becomes instinctive and effortless. Genji achieves something like this, finding peace by no longer fighting against his circumstances, but accepting and flowing with them. For Hanzo, there are influences from the Japanese aesthetic concept of mono no aware, the pathos of things, a bittersweet awareness of impermanence. Hanzo's annual pilgrimage to Shimada Castle, his ritual mourning, his inability to let go of the past, these all reflect this aesthetic of beautiful sadness. The storytelling structure of the Shimada narrative, parceling out information across different media, revealing the full story gradually, owes something to transmedia storytelling techniques that have become increasingly common in modern franchises. But it also echoes traditional oral storytelling, where stories unfold over time, with different tellers adding layers and variations. Unanswered questions and speculation. Despite all the lore we've received about the Shimada clan over the years, there remain many unanswered questions. Some of these will likely be addressed in future Overwatch content. Others may remain mysteries, left for fans to debate and imagine. What exactly happened in Shimada Castle on the night of the confrontation between Hanzo and Genji? We know the broad strokes that they fought, and Hanzo believed he killed Genji. But the specific details remain unclear. What words were exchanged? At what point did it turn from argument to violence? Did either of them try to de-escalate? Was there a specific moment when things became irreversible? The emotional truth of that night is probably more important than the specific tactical details. But knowing more about how it unfolded would deepen our understanding of both characters. Did Hanzo hesitate at all? Did Genji fight back immediately, or try to escape first? These details would tell us something about their states of mind and their relationship in that moment. How did Overwatch know to be watching Shimada Castle that night? Their extraction of Genji was remarkably timely. Did they have agents nearby already? Had they been monitoring the clan for some time, waiting for an opportunity? Was it simply fortunate timing? There's an interesting possibility that someone tipped Overwatch off. Could Asa Yamagami, knowing that a confrontation was brewing and worried about the outcome, have contacted them? Could some other member of the clan who opposed the violence have reached out? Or was it pure surveillance and quick reaction time? What was the extent of Genji's campaign against the Shimada clan during his Blackwatch years? We know he helped dismantle their operations, but how thoroughly? Were there specific missions or encounters we haven't heard about? Did he face off against people he knew from his childhood? How did those encounters affect him? There's also the question of whether Genji ever directly confronted the clan elders who had demanded Hanzo deal with him. Did he seek any kind of justice or revenge against them? Or were they already scattered or eliminated by the time he returned with Overwatch? What happened to Sojiro Shimada's body after his assassination? Where is he buried? Do Hanzo and Genji ever visit his grave? How do they feel about their father now, years later? Do they blame him for the system he perpetuated? Or do they understand he was also trapped by tradition? The relationship between Sojiro and his sons remains somewhat mysterious. Was he a loving father in his own way? Or was he cold and distant? Did he have doubts about the clan's criminal activities, or was he fully committed to that path? Understanding him better would help us understand how Hanzo and Genji were shaped. What are the limits and origins of the dragon spirits? Only Shimadas can summon them. But why? Is it genetic, spiritual, or some combination? Could someone train to gain this ability, or is it absolutely restricted to bloodline? Are there other Shimada relatives out there who might also have this power? The legend of the two dragon brothers is presented as ancient, but how old is it really? Did it originate with the Shimada clan, or did they adopt it from broader mythology? Are the dragons actually sentient beings with their own wills, or are they purely manifestations of the summoner's power? Similarly, what's the exact nature of Kiriko's connection to the fox spirit? Is the kitsune a specific individual entity, or is it more of a general spiritual force? Could others develop similar connections if they serve the shrine, or is there something unique about Kiriko and her grandmother? What will the Hashimoto clan do next? They've been relatively unchallenged in their control of Kanazaka and Hanamura, but with Kiriko's resistance growing and potentially Overwatch getting involved, their position is threatened. Will they escalate? Will they make examples of people to reassert control? Will they try to negotiate? The Hashimoto leadership remains somewhat mysterious. Who actually runs the organization? What are their goals beyond simple profit and power? Do they have connections to larger criminal networks or even to groups like Talon? Understanding them better would make them more interesting antagonists. What happened to other members of the Shimada clan after its fall? There must have been administrators, enforcers, various people employed by or connected to the organization. Some are accounted for, like Osa and Toshiro. But what about the others? Are there former Shimada loyalists who might either help or hinder any attempt to rebuild? Could there be rival claimants to Shimada leadership? Hanzo walked away from his position, but that doesn't necessarily mean everyone accepted his abdication. There might be distant relatives or ambitious former lieutenants who see themselves as the rightful heirs to the clan. What's the legal status of Hanzo and Genji? Hanzo was the head of a criminal organization, surely wanted by various authorities. Genji worked for Overwatch, and later for the reformed version, which might give him some protection, but his Blackwatch activities were questionable. Can either of them operate openly in Japan without facing arrest? The broader question of justice in relation to the Shimada clan remains unresolved. Many people were hurt by the organization's criminal activities. If Hanzo or Genji tried to do something positive with the Shimada name, would victims accept that? Or would they demand some kind of accountability first? How do ordinary people in Hanamura and Kanazaka feel about the Shimada brothers? Do they know they're both alive? Are there people who wish the Shimadas would return and restore order? Are there others who blame the brothers for the current situation, feeling that if they hadn't torn the clan apart, the Hashimotos wouldn't have moved in? Public opinion is complicated and probably divided. The Shimada clan was criminal, but it was also familiar and operated by certain rules. The Hashimotos are worse by most accounts. Does that retroactively make people view the Shimadas more favourably? It's a morally complicated question. What would Asa and Toshiro want for their daughter's future? Do they hope Kiriko will stop fighting and flee to safety? Do they support her resistance despite the danger? Would they want her to work with the Shimada brothers if that opportunity arose? Or do they have mixed feelings about that given the history? The Yamagami family's perspective on the Shimadas must be complex. They served faithfully for generations, but the clan's fall put them in a terrible position. Do they feel abandoned by Hanzo? Do they understand why he left? Would they welcome his return or resent it? Will Hanzo ever fully join Overwatch, or will he remain independent? The latter allows him more flexibility in the story and preserves his lone wolf character, but the former would provide rich opportunities for character development and interaction with other heroes. There are good narrative reasons for either choice. If Hanzo does join Overwatch, how would he interact with various members? His relationship with Genji is primary, but what about others? How would someone like Soldier 76, who carries his own burden of guilt and failure, relate to Hanzo? How would Mercy, who was involved in Genji's reconstruction, feel about Hanzo? Would Winston trust him given his past? Is there any possibility of romantic relationships for either brother? Genji's potential connection with Mercy has been hinted at but never confirmed. Hanzo has shown no interest in romance in any lore we've seen, possibly because he doesn't feel he deserves happiness. But could either or both find love as part of their healing journeys? What about children and the continuation of the Shimada bloodline? Neither brother has shown any interest in this, but the clan traditions presumably placed importance on having heirs. If the Shimada name is to continue, someone needs to carry it forward. Is this something either brother thinks about? More philosophically, what does it mean to be a Shimada in the modern world? The name carries weight, both positive and negative. The dragon spirit connection is real and significant. The martial traditions have value, but the criminal legacy is undeniable. Can the good be separated from the bad, or is it all inextricably linked? Finally, what does the future hold for Hanamura and Kanezaka? Even if the Hashimotos are defeated, what comes next? These communities need something better than simply trading one criminal overlord for another. But building legitimate governance and economic opportunity takes time and effort. Who will do that work? The symbolic meaning. Beyond the surface story. The Shimada narrative works on a literal level as a story about two brothers and their family's criminal empire. But it also operates symbolically, using these specific characters and events to explore universal human experiences and questions. At its core, the Shimada story is about the search for identity. Who are we? What defines us? Is it where we come from, our family, our cultural background? Is it what we do, our actions and choices? Is it what others expect us to be, or what we choose for ourselves? Genji's journey represents one answer to these questions. His physical transformation into a cyborg literalizes the question of identity in the most dramatic possible way. If your body's replaced, are you still you? Genji discovers that yes, identity persists through change, because it's not located in the physical form, but in consciousness, memory, choices. This speaks to anyone who has gone through major life changes. Whether it's physical changes from aging or illness, psychological changes from trauma or growth, social changes from moving or career shifts, we all face moments when we wonder if we're still ourselves. Genji's story suggests that identity is more resilient and adaptable than we sometimes think. Hanzo's struggle represents a different aspect of identity formation. He defined himself entirely through his role as Shimada heir through duty and tradition. When that role became untenable after killing Genji, his entire sense of self collapsed. He's been wandering for years, literally and metaphorically, unable to construct a new identity that incorporates what happened. This speaks to anyone who has lost a defining role or relationship. When someone's entire sense of self is built around being someone's spouse, someone's parent, someone's professional role, losing that can be devastating. Who are you when you're no longer the thing you thought defined you? Hanzo is still working on answering that question. The story is also about the weight of expectations and the damage they can cause. Both brothers were crushed by expectations, just in different ways. Hanzo internalized them to the point where he sacrificed his brother. Genji rebelled against them, but paid a terrible price. This resonates with anyone who has felt pressure to live up to family expectations, cultural norms, professional standards, or societal ideals. The pressure to be what others want us to be, to fulfill predetermined roles, to maintain traditions whether or not they serve us, this is nearly universal. The Shimada story shows how toxic this pressure can become when taken to extremes, but it also shows paths through. Genji found a way to honor his heritage while also being himself. He didn't reject being a Shimada entirely. He integrated it with his new reality and his own choices. This suggests that we don't have to completely abandon our backgrounds and the expectations placed on us. We can take what has value and release what doesn't, crafting an identity that authentically represents who we are. The theme of violence and its consequences runs deep in the narrative. The Shimada clan was built on violence. Hanzo and Genji were trained in violence from childhood. When conflict arose, violence was the tool they reached for, and violence nearly destroyed them both. This speaks to broader questions about how we handle conflict, both personal and societal. Violence often seems like a solution, a way to impose our will, to protect what matters, to achieve goals quickly. But violence creates trauma, destroys relationships, and tends to perpetuate itself. The Shimada story shows how violence, even when undertaken for supposedly honourable reasons, causes profound and lasting damage. The path to healing doesn't involve more violence. Genji doesn't seek revenge on Hanzo. He seeks understanding and reconciliation. This suggests that breaking cycles of violence requires choosing different responses, even when violence would be easier or more satisfying in the moment. Forgiveness is another major symbolic theme. Genji's forgiveness of Hanzo is extraordinary, not because Hanzo deserves it, but because Genji chooses to offer it anyway. This reflects a deep truth about forgiveness. It's not really about the person being forgiven. It's about the person doing the forgiving, choosing to release anger and pain. Many people struggle with forgiveness, both giving and receiving it. We hold on to anger because it feels righteous, because releasing it feels like letting someone off the hook. But holding on to anger primarily hurts us. Genji's forgiveness freed him to move forward with his life, rather than being trapped in the past. Hanzo's inability to forgive himself is equally important symbolically. Self-forgiveness is often harder than forgiving others because we know our own thoughts, our own motivations, all the ways we fail to live up to our ideals. We can be incredibly harsh judges of ourselves. The story suggests that self-forgiveness doesn't mean pretending we didn't do wrong. It means accepting what happened, understanding why it happened, and choosing to do better rather than being paralyzed by guilt. This is a lesson many people need to learn. The dragon spirits symbolize inheritance and legacy, both the gifts and burdens that come from family. The dragons are powerful, magnificent, connected to ancient tradition, but they're also destructive when misused. They represent the fact that what we inherit from our families is always mixed, containing both positive and negative elements. We can't completely escape our inheritance. Hanzo and Genji will always be Shimadas, will always carry the dragon spirits, will always have been shaped by their upbringing. But they can choose what they do with that inheritance. They can honour what has value while refusing to perpetuate what's harmful. The contrast between the Shimada castle and the Shambhali monastery represents different approaches to finding meaning and purpose. The castle represents tradition, hierarchy, power built on control and dominance. The monastery represents spiritual seeking, equality, growth through understanding and acceptance. Genji had to leave the castle and find the monastery to heal. This suggests that sometimes we need to physically and psychologically remove ourselves from toxic environments before we can grow. The places we come from shape us, but we don't have to stay in them if they're preventing our development. At the same time, Genji brings lessons from the monastery back to the castle when he confronts Hanzo. He hasn't completely rejected one for the other. He's integrated different sources of wisdom and experience. This suggests that healing often involves synthesis, taking the best from different places and perspectives rather than completely abandoning one for another. The seasonal imagery in the dragon's short carries symbolic weight. The cherry blossoms, the autumn leaves, the snow. These traditional symbols of impermanence and the passage of time remind us that nothing stays the same. Life is constantly changing, moving through cycles. Hanzo visits the castle at the same time each year, trying to freeze that moment, that guilt, in place. But the seasons keep changing around him. Life keeps moving forward, whether he's ready or not. The symbolism suggests that resistance to change is ultimately futile. We can either flow with change or be broken by fighting against it. The masks that both brothers wear are symbolically rich. Genji literally wears a mask that hides his face, representing how his cyborg nature initially felt like a false face hiding his true self. As he finds peace, his true face, what remains of his original features, becomes more visible in his character designs. He's no longer hiding. Hanzo doesn't wear a literal mask, but he's hiding behind his guilt and isolation. His true self, his capacity for growth and connection, is masked by his self-imposed penance. His journey toward healing requires removing this metaphorical mask, letting people see him as he really is rather than as the walking embodiment of guilt he's made himself into. Cultural impact and legacy. The Shimada storyline has become one of the most recognizable and beloved aspects of Overwatch's lore, leaving a significant cultural impact both within and beyond the game's community. The Dragon's animated short has been viewed tens of millions of times on YouTube. It's widely considered one of the best pieces of animated content Blizzard has ever produced, praised for its visual beauty, emotional resonance, and skillful storytelling. Many people who aren't Overwatch players have seen and been moved by dragons. The short has influenced other game developers and animated content creators, showing what's possible when you invest in high-quality storytelling and animation for your game's lore. It set a standard that many have tried to match. Within the Overwatch community, Hanzo and Genji have become iconic characters. They're among the most played heroes in the game, popular in competitive play and casual matches alike. Their distinctive designs and memorable abilities make them standouts even in a roster full of interesting characters. The relationship between the brothers has inspired countless fan works. Fan artists have created thousands of pieces depicting various aspects of their story, from their childhood together to potential future reconciliations. Fan fiction writers have explored every angle of their relationship, filling in gaps in the official lore and imagining alternative scenarios. The community has also created memes and jokes around the characters, though these tend to be affectionate rather than mocking. The "I need healing" meme associated with Genji players and the jokes about Hanzo players being unwilling to switch heroes, these emerge from genuine affection for the characters, even when poking fun at player behaviour. Cosplayers have embraced both characters enthusiastically. The intricate designs provide interesting challenges for costume construction, and many stunning Hanzo and Genji cosplays have appeared at conventions worldwide. The characters' visual distinctiveness makes them immediately recognizable, adding to their appeal for cosplay. Voice actors Paul Nakauchi, Hanzo, and Gaku Space, Genji, have become beloved figures in the Overwatch community. Their performances bring emotional depth to the characters, and fans appreciate the care and skill they bring to their roles. They frequently appear at conventions and engage with fans, furthering connection to the characters. The Shimada story has also had broader cultural impact in terms of Asian representation in gaming. While there are valid criticisms about how Asian characters and culture are depicted in Overwatch, the Shimada brothers represent significant, complex, central characters in a major game franchise. They're not stereotypes or sidekicks, but fully realized protagonists with their own rich storyline. The incorporation of authentic Japanese language, aesthetics, mythology, and philosophy shows respect for the source culture. While not perfect, and certainly subject to legitimate critique about cultural appropriation and stereotyping, the effort to ground the characters in real cultural context is notable. For many Asian players and fans, seeing characters like Hanzo and Genji in such a prominent role in a major game has been meaningful. Representation matters, and while we should always push for better and more authentic representation, the Shimada brothers have resonated with many people who felt seen in their story. The story has also prompted discussions about masculinity, particularly Asian masculinity. Both brothers display traditionally masculine traits: skill in combat, physical strength, stoic emotional control, but also vulnerability, deep emotion, capacity for growth and change. They're allowed to be complex rather than conforming to rigid masculine stereotypes. Genji's journey in particular challenges toxic masculinity. He learns that strength isn't about suppressing emotion or maintaining rigid control. It's about accepting vulnerability, seeking help, forming connections, and choosing peace when possible. His character development offers a model of masculinity that's healthier than many traditional depictions. The Shimada storyline has influenced discussions within game development about the importance of single-player or narrative-focused content, even in multiplayer games. Overwatch is primarily a team-based shooter, but its rich lore and character-driven stories have created engagement that goes beyond gameplay. Players care about these characters as people, not just as gameplay mechanics. This has led other developers to invest more in backstory and narrative for their multiplayer games, recognizing that players want to connect with characters emotionally, not just use them tactically. The success of Dragons and other Overwatch animated content likely influenced Blizzard's decision to develop more animated projects and potentially contributed to broader industry trends toward game-related animated content. We're seeing more games invest in high-quality animation to tell their stories. Practical analysis, storytelling techniques. Looking at the Shimada narrative from a craft perspective, we can identify specific storytelling techniques that make it effective. Understanding these helps us appreciate the skill that went into creating this story and can inform our own storytelling. One key technique is the use of visual storytelling, particularly in the Dragons animated short. So much information and emotion is conveyed through imagery rather than dialogue. The environments, the character designs, the fight choreography, the use of color and light, all of these tell the story as much as the words do. For example, when Hanzo lights the incense at the beginning of Dragons, we immediately understand this is a ritual, something sacred and solemn. We don't need explanation. The visual language communicates meaning directly. The fight sequence between Hanzo and the masked intruder is almost balletic, beautiful, and terrible at once. The way they move, the techniques they use, tells us about their training and their relationship before we know who the intruder is. When the masks come off and we see Genji's face, the visual reveal carries enormous emotional weight. His cybernetic features are shocking, but there's also still recognizable humanity there. The design itself tells a story about his journey. Another technique is the strategic withholding and revelation of information. The full story of what happened between Hanzo and Genji wasn't told all at once. It was parceled out across different media, each piece adding layers to our understanding. This kept fans engaged over time, discussing and theorizing about what really happened. It also allowed for dramatic reveals, moments where new information recontextualized what we thought we knew. The use of parallel storytelling is also effective. We follow both brothers' separate journeys, seeing how they each process the same traumatic event differently. This creates natural contrast and helps us understand both perspectives. We see Hanzo trapped in guilt and isolation, unable to move forward. We see Genji finding peace through acceptance and spiritual growth. Neither path is portrayed as obviously right or wrong in all contexts. They're different responses to trauma, each with its own validity and challenges. The incorporation of the dragon legend as a framing device is sophisticated storytelling. The legend foreshadows the brothers' conflict, gives it mythic significance, and provides symbolic language for understanding their relationship. It's not just backstory, it's actively shaping how we interpret events. When Genji quotes the legend during his confrontation with Hanzo, he's not just reciting a story. He's saying, we're living this legend, we're repeating this ancient pattern, and we need to choose whether to let it define us or to write a different ending. The character design itself is storytelling. Hanzo's traditional appearance, with his bow and his tattoo of the dragon, visually connects him to heritage and tradition. Genji's cybernetic design, blending traditional ninja aesthetics with futuristic technology, visually represents his synthesis of old and new. The environments tell stories too. Shimada Castle is visually stunning but also imposing, beautiful but isolating. It represents both the glory and the prison of the Shimada legacy. The Shambhali monastery is open, peaceful, connected to nature. It represents a different way of being. The use of language is also carefully crafted. When the brothers summon their dragon spirits, they do so in Japanese. These moments are culturally and emotionally significant, and the use of their native language reinforces that. It would feel wrong for these particular moments to be in English, but most of their dialogue is in English, in the English version, because that's what players understand. The strategic use of Japanese creates moments of particular cultural authenticity and emotional resonance without creating a barrier to understanding. The pacing of the narrative across different media is deliberate. We get intense, emotional peaks in the animated shorts. We get character development and context in the comics. We get small character moments and world-building details in voice lines and environmental storytelling. Each medium is used for what it does best. The theme of duality runs throughout, reinforced by the storytelling structure. Two brothers, two dragons, two paths after trauma, two possible futures. This creates natural symmetry and contrast that makes the story feel balanced and complete. The emotional arc is carefully constructed. We start with tragedy, the confrontation and its aftermath. We move through darkness, Genji's anger, and Hanzo's guilt. We see transformation, Genji finding peace. We reach toward resolution, the confrontation in dragons, and the offer of redemption. But we don't rush to a neat conclusion. The story respects that healing takes time. The use of flashbacks and non-linear storytelling allows us to understand the present through the lens of the past. We see adult Hanzo and Genji, but we also see them as children, helping us understand how they got to where they are. Character voice is distinct and consistent. Hanzo speaks formally, with weight and precision. Every word is carefully chosen. This reflects his personality, his self-control, his burden of responsibility. Genji, especially after his time with Zenyatta, speaks more freely, with calm but less rigid formality. He's achieved a different kind of discipline, one that allows for flexibility and flow. The strategic use of silence and negative space in storytelling is powerful. Not every moment needs to be filled with dialogue or action. The quiet moments, the pauses, the times when characters are simply present with their emotions, these create space for audience reflection and emotional resonance. The setup and payoff structure works across long time spans. Elements introduced early in Overwatch's lore, details about the Shimada clan, hints about the brothers' conflict, pay off years later when we get the full story. This rewards long-term fan engagement and makes the world feel coherent and carefully planned. Finally, the story succeeds because it's fundamentally about relatable human experiences, despite the fantastic elements. Yes, there are dragon spirits and cyborg ninjas and criminal empires, but at its heart it's about family, about struggling with expectations, about dealing with guilt and seeking forgiveness, about finding yourself after trauma. These universal themes make the specific story resonate broadly. Connections to broader Overwatch narrative. While the Shimada story is compelling on its own, it's also deeply connected to broader narratives and themes in Overwatch. Understanding these connections helps us see how it fits into the larger world and story that Blizzard is building. The fall of the Shimada clan roughly coincides with the fall of Overwatch itself. Both organizations collapsed around the same time, both victims of their own internal problems and external pressures. This parallel suggests broader themes about institutions, about how even powerful established organizations can crumble when they fail to adapt and address their internal dysfunction. The timing might not be coincidental. Overwatch's fall created power vacuums and opportunities for criminal organizations like Talon. The chaos and uncertainty of that period might have emboldened the Hashimoto clan to move against the Shimadas. Everything is connected in the Overwatch world. Events in one place ripple outward. Genji's time in Blackwatch connects him to other morally complex characters like Reyes, Cassidy, and Moira. These are people who operated in shadows, who made difficult choices, who sometimes did questionable things for what they believed were good reasons. Genji's presence in this group adds depth to his character and connects his story to these other narratives. There are parallels between Genji's relationship with Reyes and what we know of Cassidy's relationship with Reyes. Both were young men given second chances by Reyes, recruited into Blackwatch from dark places. Reyes seems to have specialized in finding people with potential and giving them opportunities, even when others would have written them off. This makes Reyes' own fall even more tragic. He was someone who believed in redemption, who gave people chances, who saw potential where others saw only problems. And yet he couldn't find redemption for himself, couldn't escape his own darkness. There's a parallel to Hanzo there, someone who might offer help to others, but can't help himself. The connection between Genji and Mercy has implications beyond their personal relationship. Mercy represents the medical and scientific side of Overwatch, the healing and support functions. Her involvement in Genji's reconstruction was probably controversial within the organization. Using advanced medical technology to turn someone into what's essentially a weapon, that raises ethical questions. These are the kinds of questions that contributed to Overwatch's fall. Where's the line between healing and enhancement, between helping someone and turning them into a tool? Mercy has always struggled with these questions, and Genji's case would have been a particularly difficult one. Genji's spiritual journey with Zenyatta connects to broader themes about omnics and consciousness. Zenyatta's teachings are about the nature of existence itself, questions that are particularly relevant in a world with artificial intelligence. If omnics can achieve enlightenment, what does that say about consciousness and the soul? Genji's acceptance that his humanity isn't dependent on his biological body parallels omnics' claims that they have consciousness and deserve rights, despite being mechanical. This creates an interesting philosophical bridge between human and omnic experiences. The recall in Overwatch's reformation brought Genji back into active hero work. His presence in the new Overwatch, his skills and his perspective contribute to what makes this new version of the organization different from the old one. He's fought his own demons and found peace. That wisdom is valuable. The new Overwatch seems to be trying to avoid the mistakes of the old one, being more transparent, more accountable, more willing to let individuals maintain their own moral compasses. Genji embodies this approach. He's part of the team but also maintains his own identity and values. The question of whether Hanzo will join this new Overwatch is still open. If he does, he would bring his own complex past and perspective. He's someone who knows intimately the cost of rigid adherence to duty and tradition. He's someone who's lived with guilt and is trying to find redemption. These experiences could make him a valuable voice in discussions about how Overwatch should operate and what lines it shouldn't cross. The situation in Kanazaka with Kiriko's resistance connects to broader themes about community action and grassroots movements. Overwatch operates at a global level, responding to major threats. But what about local problems? What about communities dealing with oppression that doesn't rise to the level of international crisis? Kiriko's story suggests that heroes can emerge anywhere, that you don't need to be part of an official organization to make a difference. But it also shows the limits of grassroots action. Kiriko and her friends are making a difference, but they're also in danger and struggling against a more powerful force. There's potential for a storyline that explores how global heroes, like Overwatch, can work with local heroes like Kiriko. How do you support community-led resistance without taking it over? How do you provide resources and assistance without imposing outside solutions? These are real-world questions that the narrative could explore. The Shimada story also connects to broader themes about legacy and inheritance. Many Overwatch characters are dealing with the legacies of previous generations. Ana and Farah dealing with Ana's absence and lies. Brigitte following in Reinhardt's footsteps, but making her own path. Lucio taking his father's technology and using it differently. Hanzo and Genji are grappling with their family's criminal legacy. They inherited power and tradition, but also the burden of crimes committed in the Shimada name. What do they owe to victims of their family's activities? What responsibility do they have to address harms they didn't personally commit but benefited from? These questions don't have easy answers, but they're important ones. The narrative doesn't pretend that simply being personally reformed is enough. There's a broader reckoning required with systemic harms and structural problems. The theme of transformation that's central to Genji's story echoes throughout Overwatch. Many characters have undergone profound transformations: Widowmaker, Reaper, Sigma, each dealing differently with changes that were imposed on them. Comparing these different responses to transformation gives us insight into different paths people take when faced with radical change. Finally, the Shimada story's emphasis on the possibility of redemption and healing connects to Overwatch's overall optimistic tone. Despite all the darkness, despite all the ways things have gone wrong, the narrative suggests that people can change, relationships can be repaired, and better futures are possible if we're willing to do the work. This optimism is part of what makes Overwatch appealing. It doesn't ignore darkness or pretend problems don't exist, but it insists that we're not doomed to repeat the past, that growth and change are possible, that hope is justified. The Shimada brothers' potential reconciliation embodies this hopeful worldview. Conclusion: why this story matters. After spending hours exploring every aspect of the Shimada clan's history, from ancient traditions to modern conflicts, from childhood bonds to violent rupture, from separate journeys to potential reconciliation, we can step back and ask, why does this story matter? What makes it worth all this attention and analysis? On the most basic level, it's simply a well-crafted story. It has compelling characters, emotional resonance, beautiful visual storytelling, and themes that speak to universal human experiences. It's enjoyable to engage with, to discuss, to think about. That alone would be sufficient reason for its popularity, but the story matters for deeper reasons too. It's a narrative about the damage that rigid systems and toxic expectations can cause, even within families and traditions that also contain genuine value. In a world where many people struggle under the weight of expectations from family, culture, religion, profession, or society, this story offers both warning and hope. The warning is clear: demanding absolute conformity, subordinating individual needs to system requirements, maintaining traditions without examining whether they serve human flourishing. These approaches destroy people. Hanzo and Genji were both victims of this dynamic, crushed between who they were and who they were expected to be. But the hope is equally clear. People can heal from even the worst trauma. They can find themselves again after being broken. They can construct new identities that honor the past while embracing change. They can forgive themselves and others for failures and mistakes. They can choose to do better going forward. Genji's journey shows that recovery is possible. It's not easy, it requires support and time and work, but it's achievable. You can integrate traumatic experiences into your sense of self without being defined or limited by them. You can find peace even when circumstances have changed dramatically. Hanzo's ongoing struggle shows that healing isn't linear or quick. You can understand intellectually that you need to change while still being trapped emotionally. You can have forgiveness offered to you and still not be ready to accept it. But the story insists that even for Hanzo, even after years of guilt and isolation, it's not too late. Change is still possible if he chooses it. The story matters because it takes seriously the question of how we handle guilt and regret. Many people carry guilt about things they've done, ways they've hurt others, failures to live up to their own values. This guilt can be paralyzing, can prevent growth and change, can keep us trapped in the past. Hanzo represents an unhealthy relationship with guilt. He's used it to punish himself, to justify isolation, to avoid moving forward. It's become comfortable in a perverse way, a familiar pain that he knows how to live with, even though it's destroying him. Genji's path suggests a healthier approach. He doesn't pretend his past actions in Blackwatch weren't problematic. He doesn't excuse the harm he caused, but he doesn't let guilt prevent him from doing good now. He acknowledges the past, learns from it, and chooses to do better. That's what healthy accountability looks like. The story matters because it explores family dynamics with nuance and depth. Families can be sources of great strength and also great pain. Love alone isn't enough if the structural dynamics are toxic. Communication, respect, the willingness to prioritize relationships over abstract concepts like honor or tradition, these are essential. The possibility of reconciliation between Hanzo and Genji matters because it suggests that even profoundly damaged family relationships can potentially be repaired. Not erased or returned to what they were, but transformed into something new that acknowledges what happened while also allowing for connection and growth. This is relevant to many people who have complicated family situations, estrangement, conflict, old wounds that never fully healed. These are common human experiences. The Shimada story doesn't offer a simple formula for fixing these problems, but it does suggest that repair is sometimes possible if all parties are willing to do the difficult work. The story matters because it engages seriously with cultural specificity while also being universal. The Japanese setting and cultural elements ground the story in a real tradition and way of life, but the themes, family conflict, identity formation, dealing with trauma, seeking forgiveness, these transcend any specific culture. This balance between cultural specificity and universal themes is part of what makes the story resonate globally. Japanese players can see authentic elements of their culture represented. Players from other backgrounds can still connect with the core human experiences being explored. The story matters because it shows different models of masculinity. Hanzo and Genji represent strength, skill, discipline, traditionally masculine traits. But they also show vulnerability, emotion, the capacity for growth and change. They're allowed to struggle, to need help, to find strength in acceptance rather than rigid control. In a media landscape that often presents narrow and toxic versions of masculinity, the Shimada brothers offer more complete and humane alternatives. They're not perfect, but they're real in their complexity. The story matters because it's part of a larger conversation about violence and its consequences. The Shimada clan was built on violence. Hanzo and Genji's confrontation was violent. Genji's initial response as a Blackwatch operative was more violence. But the path to healing involved moving away from violence toward understanding and acceptance. In a world struggling with how to address conflict at every level, From personal to international, stories that explore alternatives to violence are valuable. The Shimada narrative doesn't pretend violence is never necessary, but it shows clearly that violence as a first resort or primary tool causes profound damage. The story matters because it demonstrates the power of mentorship and support. Genji's transformation was possible because Zenyatta saw potential in him and offered guidance. Kiriko's resistance is possible because she had Asa's training and has friends to support her. Hanzo's isolation is part of what keeps him stuck. We all need support, guidance, people who believe in us and help us grow. The story reminds us of this essential human truth and encourages us to be that support for others when we can. The story matters because it's still ongoing. We don't know yet how it will resolve. Will Hanzo join Overwatch? Will the brothers fully reconcile? Will they return to Japan to help Kiriko? What will become of the Shimada legacy? These open questions keep us engaged and invested. And finally, the story matters because it insists that our pasts don't have to determine our futures. Hanzo and Genji were born into a criminal organization, raised with toxic expectations, traumatized by violence, but they're not doomed to simply repeat these patterns. They can choose differently. This message of agency, of the power to choose who we become, regardless of where we started, is fundamentally hopeful and important. Many people feel trapped by their circumstances, their histories, their mistakes. The Shimada story says, you can change. It won't be easy, but it's possible. Your past is part of you, but it doesn't have to control you. That's a message worth hours of exploration and analysis. That's why this story matters. Thank you for watching this complete history of the Shimada clan. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Overwatch lore, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. There's so much more to explore in this universe, and I'll be covering all of it. Let me know in the comments what aspect of the Shimada story resonates most with you, or what other Overwatch lore you'd like to see explored next. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. And